Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy to have you all join us again for our day 3 of our gathering. As people join, please feel free to chat with us. There is the chat feature in the bottom of your panel screen. Throw in there where you're coming from today and how you're doing. We're so thrilled to have everybody joining us. So to get us started, I'd like to just reintroduce myself. Dati Tetso Suje. My name is Dati Tetso. I'm the Deputy Director of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. And we're so excited to kick off day 3 of this gathering. The theme for today is the environment of guardianship. And there is a link to today's agenda in your participant guide that was emailed to you all this morning. But we can also throw a link in the chat box to the website landing page where you can also find an outline for today's events. So today, our whole gathering is hosted in our big room, or sorry, our big tent setting. So that means there will be no need to zoom around in and out of meetings today. Yesterday, we hosted small tent gatherings in separate Zoom spaces, and it went amazingly. I really enjoyed our breakout sessions yesterday. I hope you did too. And we have more small tent settings planned for tomorrow. In the meantime, I'd like to encourage everyone to continue connecting via social media. If you haven't joined our private Facebook page for the gathering, please do. We've dropped a link to that private Facebook page in the chat. It's been great to see so many people join it. Go to the Facebook page and check out the photo stories that are being shared. Must see to those who posted pictures. I love your beautiful photographs. I love hearing your stories. Must see for sharing your voice. We also initiated a number of TikTok challenges yesterday. And it's been great to see 3 posts from 3 different guardians on the Facebook page. So if you would like to participate in the TikTok challenge, we've got 3 that we've crafted for the week. The first being show us your guardian look. The second, join our movement and sign the Land Needs Guardians petition and encourage your family and friends to do the same. And the third is tell us what it's like to be a guardian without actually telling us you're a guardian. It's been awesome. So must-see to Cole and to Stephanie and to Cody for posting a TikTok, one TikTok lover to another, must-see. Just as a quick reminder, there is French translation available for our Zoom session today. To enable that French translation if you need it, there is a translation interpretation link on your screen. You click it and then you can select French from the menu that appears. And while we are not offering Indigenous language translation for our Zoom sessions today, please know that that is important to the ILI and it's something that we will work towards for the future. And finally, I wanted to just let you guys all know that we do have some journalists and media joining us today in our audience. And so we'd like to just welcome them. And with that, I'm hoping we can invite Najitzel to join me on the Zoom here so we can hear about her beautiful artwork from yesterday.
Oh, wow. Good morning, everyone. Just doing a little recap here. Hey, Dati?
Yes, please.
Okay, sounds good. So ta-da! Here's the final from yesterday. I just had a blast finishing it last night. I added that little Dungeness crab there. You'll see there's, the addition as well of some quotes from the Guardians. So the next generation to come will have clean lands and waters with guardian protection. Robbie very eloquently said that it's in our DNA to tell stories. By telling our stories, we assert ourselves, our stories, and our truth. And then as we move to the right, we see the photo stories with Charlotte, Hannah, and Jack. And I really wanted to capture those in sort of a visual form. But Jack's quote down there, we don't go to disturb, we go to converse with our ancestors. And I think that's that's such a beautiful way of talking about protections of our lands and territories. So that is the final. I hope you enjoy it. And I'm attempting to do another one today.
Yay. Marcina, we so appreciate your beautiful artwork. It's such an empowering image. So masicho.
Thanks, guys.
I wanted to share with everyone joining us today that the National Turtles Lodge Elders and Keepers Council, I believe it was yesterday, released a statement where they are calling for a National Day of Prayer on Sunday, June the 6th, to honor the 215 children that were found in Kamloops, BC. If you would like to join that collective prayer, you can check out their Facebook page. And with that, I'd like to introduce our wonderful director, Valerie Couture, who will get us started.
Thank you so much, Dati. Wow, what a amazing couple days we've had. And Nijitzel, you capture our conversation so well. It's amazing to see the product that you're able to produce in such a short time and to really get at the essence of our conversations. We made such a great decision in having you join us. I'm beyond pleased about it. Before we move into our first official discussion, I do want to note that as we speak, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls response from the Government of Canada is being shared. I am wearing my pin in solidarity. Some of you may know that I was a Master of Ceremonies for the ceremony where the report was given to the Prime Minister 2 years ago to this day. And I am thinking of all of those families, the commissioners, everybody who just poured their heart to honor the stories of our missing women, girls, and two-spirited persons. And I just wanted to note that you're all in our thoughts, and we hope that all of the recommendations from the report will be implemented. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing my friend and colleague, Miles Richardson. Miles is currently the executive director of the National Consortium for Indigenous Economic Development at the University of Victoria. He's also a proud senior advisor to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative and has been for, gosh, over 5 years now, Miles. It's been that long. And continues to just do the good work. He is, of course, a recipient of the Order of Canada. He is the former president of the Haida Nation, in fact, was instrumental in the development of the agreement for the Guayhanas National Park, but also in defending the rights of the Haida people to be able to consent to activities on Haida Gwaii. He's worked extensively on the marine use plans and other formats, and he was also a former treaty commissioner for the province of British Columbia. I could go on and on, but Miles, thanks for joining us today and telling us a little bit more about the work that you've been leading in helping the ILI think about shaping what an Indigenous-led national guardians network could look like.
Thank you, Val, and I'm really looking forward to participating this morning and giving some structure and process to the business case for a national Indigenous Guardians Network. That's a partnership between all of you First Nations from coast to coast to coast in this great territory and this great place we now call Canada, and the Government of Canada. I really look forward to this, but first want to thank you and the supporters and organizers for always opening and beginning important processes such as this with proper ceremony. It's really important to us working together constructively in a good way and achieving the outcomes, which I know we're going to achieve. And also to Dati, your assistant director, and all of the participants, the guardians from across the country who've brought such a level of enthusiasm and hope to what's possible with this Guardians network, and it persuades me, the last couple of days has persuaded me even more than I already was, that this is going to unfold in a good way beyond what we'd imagined. And our nations are going to be strengthened. Our Indigenous nations are going to be strengthened, and Canada is going to become so much closer to its potential for our involvement. What I'd like to do is just to take a few minutes, take about 15 or 20 minutes, and do a broad stroke overview of the business case, and then open it to Q&A. Val will coordinate that. And I've had some good help in drafting and researching and drafting this business case, and Jackie Miller and the team that worked with me will be available to support us on that Q&A should we need it. But the National Indigenous Guardians Network, this is the third national gathering that we've held. The first two, our first national gathering was in 2016 in Ottawa, and the second national gathering was in 2019 in Vancouver. And when we look at the vision and the purpose of a National Guardians Network, let's go back to the beginning and remember how we started. Originally, the Guardians Initiative came out of a group called the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, which was a group of experienced First Nations leaders from across the country who got together on their own accord and worked in support of our Indigenous nationhood, worked in support of implementing our First Nations laws, our First Nations jurisdictions in our territories throughout this country. And first started off focusing that effort on conservation and on conservation of the boreal forests. And as that unfolded and more Indigenous people got empowered and enabled through this vision, something became very clear, is that the boreal forests don't exist just on their own in isolation. That as First Nations remind us continually, everything is connected to everything else. And very soon we learn that our oceans, those are people who are people of the ocean, our oceans begin on the mountaintops, and all the waterways and the veins of life that connect the mountaintops to the oceans where our people live are one thing. The fate of one part of that befalls the fate of all. So we realize we need to work together, and more the conservation efforts and the respect for Indigenous traditional knowledge expanded from the boreal areas to other areas of this country. And now we're looking at a coast to coast to coast, a Guardians network that would cover with success every square inch of this place that we call home of Canada. So that vision has been very strong and very compelling. And we've had a really dedicated group of leaders that have, this is about the third iteration of leadership at the ILI level that I've been aware of. And it's a really powerful, strong group who believes in our cultures, who believes in our people, and believes in invoking our cultures. So it's been a growing movement. And from the boreal to land, a lot of effort became focused on land use planning. Many today refer to that as land relation planning. And now there's a lot of priority on people across this country on marine use planning, land and marine use planning. In Canada, through our conservation commitments to the international community and to ourselves, are stepping up to the plate and providing support politically and financially for land and marine stewardship across this country, which works very effectively with the vision and purpose of this Guardians Network. As well as protecting our territories and supporting the health of the lands and waters and various species in our territories, our work is to enable meaningful economic opportunities and career paths for our people in our homelands. And really importantly, as we build a proper nation-to-nation relationship with Canada, it's really important that we build and we maintain and develop, I should say, nation-to-nation relationships amongst ourselves as Indigenous people. In the long run, that's going to be our key to success. And as we truly build international conservation and stewardship from coast to coast to coast. What we've done with this project is built on the first two national gatherings. And you saw in the executive summary to the business case that we started off in the 10 years or so ago with about 30 Guardians programs across this country. And what we wanted to do was to begin discussions on a national network with those original participants, and every year grow the network from interested nations, and eventually get up to 400 Indigenous programs. Most of those, you know, the RCAP, when it looked at nations in Canada, they speculated that there'd be between 50 and 80 nations in this country, Indigenous nations. So many of these nations would have more than one program, but that's what our planning pointed us toward, is about that after 5 years of full investment and development of this initiative, we'd have about 400 programs across this country. And not today, we're up to about 90, and who participated in the consultations that we've had in building this Guardians Network business case. And the business case, you all have access to the executive summary. You can read it word for word. It's a long and detailed document that I want you to remember this, that it's a work in progress, that as we continue discussions amongst ourselves as the participating Guardians programs and the nations that we're a part of, as we build our relations and our vision amongst ourselves, and as we build our partnership and negotiate and detail the implementation of this with the government of Canada, the business case is going to evolve. So look at it as a work in progress, and what you have in front of you is a beginning point, and we'll develop that as we go. So our foundational principles for our methodology and approach are self-determination, of course. Our people, and as Indigenous people, are who we've always been. We've been here for hundreds of generations, for thousands of years, each in our own territory, with the fundamental human right to be self-determining, and we stand on that. Our cultures remind us of the strength that we get from multiple perspectives, so that if we're not in competition with other ways of knowing within our territory, but work to understand each other and work together, we'd be strengthened. And that was brought to us by the two-eyed seeing approach. And really importantly to this initiative, establishing nation-to-nation relationships amongst First Nations and between First Nations and Canada for these stewardship initiatives. So we've had, in the consultations, we've had 9 consultations, regional-based consultations, and many more individual interviews of participants and guardians programs across this country. And if any of you want to see the list of, there's a list attached to the executive summary of the business case online on the website with a brief description of every Guardians program that exists and is in development across this country. I'd encourage you to look at that and look at other nations. Many of them will be neighbors to you who are moving forward. Guardians are a contemporary expression of First Nations ancestral responsibilities to manage and monitor our lands and waters. I was involved in one of the early ones, which was the Haida Gwaii Watchman in Haida Gwaii, and I know tomorrow you're going to be honoring one of the original Haida Gwaii Watchmen, Captain Gold. And I thank you for that, and I really look forward to that moment as we move forward. But really importantly is Guardians receive our authorities from the rights and title of our nations, from the inherent authority of our Indigenous nations. Our guardians come forward and build on our stewardship ethic. And when we're looking at the vision for the Guardians Network, let's remember that our nations have held in common a responsible stewardship ethic. That's been something that Indigenous people across these lands have held, and in my view is one of the main reasons that we exist and are still strong today. That ethic is embedded and transmitted through our cultures, and invoking our cultures, we're bringing that back to life and ensuring that not only First Nations, but Canadians are going to solve the big challenges of human survival that we've put in front of us over the past few years. We've seen as the consultations have unfolded and more people have become involved in the dialogue, a growing chorus of voices in support of Guardians and our national network, led by participating First Nations, bolstered by Indigenous organizations, the Assembly of First Nations, and many parliamentarians. When we started promoting the Guardians Network on Parliament Hill, we had every party supported this initiative. Every committee that we went to was very supportive and put in the record of their committee's support for this initiative. And today we see the most recent budget of the Government of Canada. We put forward an ask through the Guardians Network of $831.5 million to be spent over 5 years. In the last budget, Canada has allocated $2.3 billion, but to 5 strategic areas, one of which is the Guardians Network. Another one closely related of those 5 is Indigenous protected and conserved areas which is a big priority now in terms of conservation, terrestrial and marine conservation for the government of Canada. But the other other areas, which are wildlife conservation and provincial initiatives in this area, are very related to Guardian Network-like activities. So we're gonna see over the coming weeks and months how the details of this this $2.3 billion allocation in this year's budget will roll out, and we're gonna push to make sure that our ask of $831.5 million to the Guardians Network is included in those expenditures. And following this presentation today will be the Minister, Jonathan Wilkinson of the Government of Canada, who will lead that decision-making on behalf of the Government of Canada for this initiative. So pay attention to what he has to say, because all this is in play and negotiations as we speak. And your focus, your push, your involvement in this is going to be crucial. So we're looking at, with those expenditures, the expansion of First Nations Guardians programs from 90 that exist today to 400 over 5 years. That's our assumption. We're looking at how many potentially there are to bring aboard. And when we did the consultation, it was I was so impressed at the intensity of the engagement of program managers and actual Guardian participants from across this country who participated in the discussion and contributed to the formation of bringing their program into alliance with others across this country to build common initiatives to make their program on the ground the best it could be, but to make it reflecting values that we share with other nations and with Canada, and to make all of us, to elevate all of us on this in this initiative for a Guardians Network. One question we asked them is, why do we want to build a First Nations Guardians Network? And clearly, this network would support Guardians on the ground, reducing the need for capacity-constrained programs to struggle alone or to reinvent any wheels. The Guardians programs on the ground could share services, technical administrative support, training curricula and accreditation, facilitating collaboration amongst Guardians programs and First Nations, and really importantly, streamlining bureaucratic processes, making funding applications and reporting and improving the consistency and timing of funding flows. That's a big problem to programs today, and we can, working together and with the Government of Canada, get to know each other, get to know our needs and what we need to be effective, and help each other to streamline that process. A network would act as a catalyst, accelerating development of Guardians programs across the country through central and regional knowledgeable staff, assisting First Nations ready to start programs. Would facilitate nation-to-nation relations amongst First Nations and between First Nations and Canada through bringing nations together in this network form. The Secretariat could assist programs in accessing data and info held by other parties. Really important priority that was brought up by program managers is the need for information sharing between and amongst First Nations, some of whom live in proximity and in bioregions, on watersheds, but also sharing information formally with other governments. Some have pointed out that information is power, and often once an authority, a government gets into power, they hoard information, and that's certainly been my experience. And we got to figure ways of opening that up and make information flow more readily between and amongst ourselves as Guardians networks. The core themes of what support our resources, in addition to funding, First Nations Guardians program would like to see from a national network include creating standardized First Nations guarding training and accreditation. This was a really important priority, that we need accredited, meaning getting appropriate university or college or First Nation acknowledgement and accreditation for the results of training, the skills development of watchmen, to have that as accumulating respectful accreditation for the skills of a watchman. And this theme was big in the Vancouver National Gathering, and there's a lot of interest in building on that across the country. And to do that, we need to create standardized First Nations Guardians training and accreditation, serving as the clearinghouse for tools and information sharing for Guardians programs, providing shared, secure First Nations owned databases along with capacity to undertake useful data analysis, providing shared regional and national support staff, and creating connections between Guardians and First Nations. Let's go back to serving as a clearinghouse for tools and information sharing for Guardians programs. One-stop shop for funding resources, communicating to Guardians programs what funding is available from the network, how to access it, and where to find other funds for larger or more established projects. Equipment cost lists and recommendations, suppliers lists, little things like this, the managers and Guardians pointed out were essential to their success. They have limited resources. They've got to make the best use, most effective use of the resources have, and items on this list were things that would really help their Guardians initiatives. Providing shared, secure First Nations owned databases. Information is essential to asserting jurisdiction, to being effective in being responsible stewards. Information is essential, and we need to build and work together on best practices, on systems to make this effective, to make it work. And Guardians, we heard from coastal Guardians here, we've heard from Guardians in the Innu, we've heard from Guardians in the North who are developing their own systems, who are sharing information, and we need to redouble those efforts at a national and regional basis to make that really more effective. And it's a need that's there immediately. It's a need, along with training, information sharing, that First Nations could take advantage of right now. Sharing shared regional and national staff support. Basically, many Guardians programs felt isolated. They felt that they're on their own, they were inventing the wheel every time they had to do something. We need to break down those silos. We need to get best practices out there and share good information on how other successful programs have accomplished the same challenges you're facing. Communication support. Every one of us know these are rural areas. These are areas that safety is a big concern. Communication is essential to making these Guardians programs work, and we need to work together at a national and regional basis to set up these communication systems and to make them effective and to make them cost effective. Sharing scientific specialists. We could have a scientific subcommittee for the network others talked about. It was a very rich discussion amongst the Guardians on these areas, and you can read more. Take the time to read in the business case documents the summary of these dialogues. I can only gloss over them here in the time today, but I really want you to learn from each other and all the good information that was shared. Guardians are eager to connect with one another, but have no formal structure through which to do that. Our National Guardians Network, and as the regional alliances evolve, they'll be provided those opportunities to do that. Collaborative regional development opportunities like joint training and learning opportunities, industry partnership at a regional level, or sharing costs on some projects would be valuable. Fledgling programs, beginning programs would scale up faster if they had access to established Guardian stories rather than reinventing the wheel. Very important function of this Guardians network. I'm going to try and close off on this. Well, I've got 2 more points, but in terms of governance of this Guardians network is really critical. It's essential. It's going to mean success in the long run. And we've taken, in terms of establishing the government, so many participants made absolutely crystal clear they don't want another government program where you line up and fill out a perfect application to suit some bureaucratic need. That what we need is an initiative, a Guardians Network initiative that's primary purpose, its first responsibility is to move resources and knowledge to the Guardians Network on the ground in the Indigenous people's territory. That's the prime purpose of this network, and we need to design it as such. So every nation, Guardians Net who authorizes and enables a Guardians program will define that in their territory. That will be the beginning point. Nobody will parachute this in for you. You need to take the initiative and build and authorize your Guardians network. And those will grow. As we said, we started off with 30. We're at 90 today. We expect full out after 5 years, about 400 across the country. We got a long way to go. Lots of work to do to get resources to that level. But right now, in partnering with the government of Canada, we need to set up a decision-making authority at the national level so that when Canada flows this money, which is sitting in the budget in general terms as we speak, that we have a decision-making process at the national level that reflects what I just said, the priority of moving that money effectively and efficiently to the Guardians program on the ground. And what we propose and what we've outlined in the business case report is a healing foundation type board, a non-political board at the national level that has a clear set of principles to guide its decision-making in making allocation funding decisions. And that board would be supported by the current administrative body that's been set up to reflect our partnership with Canada, the Joint Working Group. The Joint Working Group would be the working area for the partnership between Canada and First Nations, and most of the recommendations for funding allocations would come, the processing and work would be done at the joint working group level recommended to the national, the network secretariat. And the network secretariat we're recommending would be made up, and First Nations were really clear on this. We asked them the specific question, should it be just First Nations or should it be joint federal and First Nations? First Nations wanted it to be a First Nations secretariat, the National Administrative Council board for the Guardians Network. And of course, as we come along, we have regional alliances. We're going to need to have regional alliances grow as we move forward. We haven't put a lot of detail into how these would be structured. The initiative, we believe, must come from the Guardians programs themselves. And, you know, looking across this country right now, I see in the Northwest Territories, there's an initiative beginning in the Northwest Territories for all those programs in the NWT to work together already on a regional alliance that would build relations with the National Network Council, the national governance arm of the Guardians Network. So all the details are in the executive summary. But really, as we talk, as you know, we look later today at the minister coming aboard, talking, all of this is feeding really nicely into work that ICE, our Indigenous Indigenous Circle of Experts, have steered the Canada's international conservation commitments through the United Nations forums into Indigenous-led conservation, and they've identified a vehicle called the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, which is very close to what the ILI has been working on since this inception of this Guardians Network of Indigenous protected areas. So the more we can bring those together and finance the development of Guardians Network and their attendant institutions across the country, the better off we're going to be. But we're very much on the same page. And one of our challenges is to bring those initiatives together going forward. Val, I'm going to leave it at that, and hopefully we have time for some questions. And I just encourage all the participants here to read the documents that have been shared to you on the business case, particularly the executive summary. Thank you, Val.
Miles, thank you so much for that great presentation. I hope that folks, I know that was a lot of information, so please do consult those documents. And as Miles said, you know, this is a work in progress. This is the ILI and its partners trying to figure out what does it look like to work with the federal government in a nation-to-nation process, and how can we make, you know, go beyond the dynamic of project-based programs where there is an office in Gatineau or in Ottawa that is making judgments on your proposals without necessarily fully understanding the depth and level of impacts your work has, not just for your own nations, but for everybody else. And really, the joint working group that you're going to hear from next is kind of the interim to that model. It was our way of saying, okay, Government of Canada, you've made this budget, you created a program. Let's shape that in a way that is as indigenized as possible and respects the knowledge and leadership that exists on the ground, and use that perspective to ensure success on the ground, and certainly to include Indigenous definitions of that success in the evaluation of that program. So this is where we're going. But as Miles stated, we're trailblazing here. There are a few examples of other large initiatives. Miles spoke to the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, which existed in the mid 90s to mid 2000s. Those are certainly places to look to. But this idea of a national partnership on Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship is quite new. And we're going to need your assistance, your perspective, your brain power, your heart to help make this into a network that will truly serve Indigenous interests right across what is now known as Canada. We've been noting some questions. Thank you to those who've taken the time to type your questions in the chat. We really, really appreciate it. I don't know that we'll get to all of them. We've got 10 minutes, Miles, for questions, just for your clock. And so we'll dive right in. The first question, how do you see governments approving First Nations laws on the land, and where do they draw a line? Are they proponents? Do they go with big business? Essentially, my interpretation of that question, Miles, is how would the network be interpreting laws or defining roles?
Really importantly, the Guardians Network on the ground is essentially an agent of their respective nations. Their nations are the ones whose business it is to create their contemporary laws, to articulate their laws and implement them using groups like their Guardians program to implement. But that's the work of their nation. And their nations are going to have to establish and legitimize those laws and work with other governments to implement them. The Guardians would be a tool for those nations in implementing their own laws. The Guardians wouldn't be developing the laws themselves. They would receive their laws from their nation.
Well, speaking of that, Miles, how the network is in a way, it's skirting a little bit the rights and title defense kind of movement that we have, AFN having that mandate and others. How do we make sure that the network is really doing what you just said, serving those nations, and not in any way kind of being interpreted as a group that is there to defend rights and titles rather than to serve Guardians?
Well, really, the challenge is for us to just be who we are in our territories. We're the people that have far predated Canada in our territories. Our authorities, our governance institutions are legitimate. They're legitimate in our eyes. We must insist that as a part of this partnership, Canada recognizes that. When we first started off this partnership proposal with Canada, Val, you'll remember that there were two principles we put on the table. One, that this be developed in the spirit of the nation-to-nation relationship that Canada had formally committed to by the Prime Minister, I think in 2018 in the famous Valentine's Day speech, to establish a proper nation-to-nation relationship. We need to insist that that be the context that this Guardians initiative operate in, that this not just default to being a regular top-down federal government program. I saw the summary of day one, the graphic, that beautiful graphic that you're developing to summarize the discussion. One of the first comments I saw on that graphic is, let's decolonize our programs. That's exactly the way, to me, that's how you decolonize your program, is to respect and implement your own nation's laws.
Great. Thank you, Miles. A second question that we had is, as there are 90 Guardian programs, I'm just wanting to determine, are these programs full-time or are they part-time by nature? Are they still dependent on project funding? And the reason they're asking is because they're trying to support local First Nations on starting programs, and a lot of the work is project and typically only seasonal. So, what is our vision for Guardians? And maybe I could start to address that as the director of the ILI, Miles, and you could add, Our vision
But
is that the
you're
nation's,
so aware of the administrative needs, Val, lay them out.
yeah, well, that's the thing. So, you know, our vision for guardians is that the nations have the guardians that they need at the time that they need them. And so that could look in like multiple things. When I was director of the environment program here at the Innu Nation in Labrador, we often had our fisheries guardians become caribou guardians in the winter. And what we did is we try to kind of join programs to be able to create full-time employment, and therefore for them to have all of the benefits, et cetera, that comes with that full-time employment. That did require quite a lift. And it's exactly what we're hoping the network will help address, is to kind of bring together all of these little pots, including, you know, of course, the Guardian funding, but there are a number of other programs that government runs: the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk, the community-based monitoring program within INAC, the habitat restoration programs that are run through NRCan and Environment Canada, and environmental assessments. I could just go on and on and on. And this network is actually a way that we're hoping to say, look, guardians have this responsibility and these needs. What can we do as a network to bring all of that together and create a common strategy and a common goal that will ensure success for us all, and can demonstrate the return on investment for government.
Yeah. Well, you know, from your experience, a successful Guardians program is going to need full-time employees at the front end till you get all your strategic plans, until you get all your operational plans, until you get all those things in place. The operating season the operating time might be seasonal, but you know, you're going to have to set up training programs, which would probably happen in the off season. You're going to have to set up communications initiatives. You're going to have to set up all these other initiatives, which take administrative resources and time. And that's a reality, is, you know, as in every one of you who are out there building your own programs knows that there's tremendous pressure for full-time participants. And until you get to that point where everything's set up and functioning so you can turn the light switch on and off on operating season, you're going to need full-time participants.
Yeah.
But that's your call. Each nation has to make that call themselves, and we've got to work the best we can through the network governance board and through our regional affiliations to support these programs so that they have those needs fulfilled. Even with this federal contribution, even if they contributed all that we asked for, 831.5, it wouldn't be enough to have full-time employees across the board in every program. We're going to have to work together and push to get there.
Well, that's a great point you make, Miles. You know, the intention of our partnership with the Government of Canada is never for the Government of Canada to be the one-stop shop for fully funding a nation's Guardian program. What it's meant to be is core support upon which other partnerships can then be built, right? Whether those are local proponents, some may have mines on your lands that you can negotiate impact benefit agreements that include roles for guardians, provincially based agreements. Here in Labrador, there was a co-management agreement with the province of Newfoundland and Labrador for forestry resources that included significant funding for forest guardians. So that's part of the model, is that it's really not meant, you know, and the 831 million that we applied for, and I'm going to take the time in a minute to just put a link for folks on this call so that you can see the budget application that ILI submitted and read it for yourself. Was really meant to be just that kind of core support that upon which other programs, other funds, other partnerships should be built upon. And that core support is essential. Without the presence of those core guardians, it's that much harder. It's that much of a bigger lift to convince those other partners and proponents to invest. And having the Government of Canada being a principal core investor kind of brings some investments certainty for those other partners as well.
And Val, that's one of the challenges going to be for you and the ILI in the negotiations that are just beginning with the Government of Canada, to identify enough of that core support so that these Guardians networks on the ground that are our partners and we're supporting have enough core capacity to be able to access the IPCA, the marine protected areas, to access all of those dollars. We're going to have to tack together those resources the best way we can to make this work. And that's a really good question, because Guardians programs on the ground need that ongoing, I'd say, full-time capacity.
Yeah, yeah. Another question. Through their experience when speaking from a nationalist perspective, all Indigenous peoples do not present a sovereign direction. How do we manage all of these different directions within the network?
We have difference of opinion on that amongst the ILI group about how hard we should be pushing that. We all agree on that principle, and I don't think there's an Indigenous person who doesn't agree to that principle of Indigenous sovereignty, pressing Indigenous authority. How much we rely on it depends on our political leaders, I believe. You know, in the Haida Nation, in the early days of the Haida Gwaii Watchmen, that's what our nation's politics was about. Protecting our territory was our #1 political priority. Other nations have other priorities, you know, whether it's child welfare, whether it's language, and I know that's their business. But our nations need to push on asserting our sovereignty, on asserting our authority for it to come true. And the Guardians can only implement that to the degree that they have that political support to push it. You know, part of the success of the Haida Nation and the Coastal First Nations initiative is their nations made that the #1 priority. And pay attention to across the rest of the country. You look at the Coastal First Nations, most of the Coastal First Nations don't have their title recognized by Canada yet, although I think that's very close, but have essentially require their consent for any land and marine uses in their territory. That's a big step from 20 years ago. Nobody even talked to us 20 years ago. Now, if you're going to do something, if you're going to be a business or something that wants to bring a project into our territory, you need to do it with our consent. That was a big reason for the political push. And the Guardians were, a field agent to implement that. Really important part. You know, there's no Tock's talk. You got to get out there and implement that. And, you don't have to be cranky about it. You can implement your authority in a nice way. And, that's one thing we found. And talk to Captain Gold about it tomorrow. We could have used our authority to tell visitors to take off, get out of here. No, we decided we'd use our authority and send our watchmen out to welcome our visitors and explain to them who we are and explain to them the way they must act in our territory. They loved it, and it's been very successful. We're not all the way there yet. Some of these changes take time.
Well, what is the saying? Everything that's worthwhile takes more than a minute. And unfortunately,
but also remember about asserting your sovereignty and your authority. If you don't believe it, nobody else is gonna.
Amen. On that note, unfortunately, Miles, we've run out of time for the session. Thank you so much, Hawa, for your time and all of the work that's gone into this business case and your commitment to continuing the work on the development of that network and ensuring that we do truly have a process that recognizes our authority as peoples and as nations. So Hawa, thank you very much.
And good luck and Godspeed, Val, to you and your team. We have a chance to do this. Canada is going to be such a better place for it. Go and get them.
Right on. Thanks, Miles. Well, at this time, I am pleased to present two lovely colleagues, Loretta Baer and Julie Boucher. They will be telling us a little bit more about that joint working group that we've just heard about, which is that interim process. And I got to say, it's a bit of the kind of the background, how do you make things work and in programs, and it's not as fun as kind of our political work or some of the comms work, but the work of the joint working group has truly been remarkable. And the way that the working group has created the space for Indigenous leadership within a department, within a program, has really been something to watch. And I know that, having been witness to some of the reactions to the programs on the ground, the comments like, wow, there must be some Indigenous peoples who are involved here, because the applications look different, or the way that we're being received is different, is something to note. And so in order to just set up this presentation, Loretta, you're going to be giving us a little bit more of an overview of the role of the joint working group and how it works. And Julie, thank you for joining us. Julie, you're going to tell us a little bit more about the full breadth of potential support that exists within the Government of Canada for the work of Guardians. And at the end of the presentation, we talked about the joint working group. Its mandate is actually derived from the gatherings. And so at the last gathering in 2019, we confirmed the continuing mandate of the joint working group. The original mandate for the joint working group was developed in 2016 at the very first gathering. And we will be checking with you again if you agree as Guardians, as the very community that the joint working group serves, to extend that mandate again. So I will come back after the presentation to do just that. So without further ado, Loretta Baer from Norway House Cree Nation, a proud Cree woman, over to you.
Thank you, Val. Thank you so much for that introduction, and really awesome to listen to Miles talk about the future of how we're going to be doing things. So my name, as Val said, is Loretta Baer. I am a Sunwalking woman from Norway House Cree Nation. I'm here as a guest on Treaty 1 territory. I come from Treaty 5 territory. Okay. As First Nations leaders, we wanted to ensure that this was just not another government program. So what we did was we established the First Nations caucus to work aside of government representatives to make this program, make this initiative meaningful to us as First Nations across the land, coast to coast to coast, as people have said. We have also a number of other First Nations who sit on the joint working group. I did think that they would be on the screen as well, but perhaps they will come up in a bit, and that would be Linda Dwyer Commando from Kitsikenzebe, Keith Christmas, member 2 First Nation, Greg Jodoir, who is a counselor out in Newfoundland, Jimmy Morgan from up in BC. These people have been working very hard as part of the joint working group, the Indigenous caucus. We thank ILI for the support, Shauna Morgan Sears, Carol Kavanagh, Melody Morrison, Deity and Val, and certainly Frank Brown. We wanted to demonstrate what it means to enact a nation-to-nation relationships. And like any relationship that we have here, we have had our ups and downs as a joint working group. We've had tremendous amount of time for learning opportunities on both sides of our relationship here. And it's been challenging and it's been fun. And I can honestly say that my co-chair too will agree with me, and all of the members of the working group, that we've really come a long way. We've really done a really amazing job at relationship building and to teach the to teach each other and to forge this new relationship. We've created an interim model for administering First Nations guardian funds. This is a model that's been adapted from year to year. We've made constant improvements upon it, we think. We've worked hard to indigenize the First Nations Pilot Fund, and we've created tools that we hope are easier to use. We think it's culturally appropriate, culturally relevant, it's culturally supportive to the people in the communities in all their uniqueness. Because as Miles has said, we are very unique from one another, and everything in our program should be there to support individualized communities. We are fiscally aware and responsive to First Nations realities. And Miles just spoke about the future, the National First Nations Guardian Network, a one-stop shop for Guardians to access fund. We're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet, but as we continue on this path towards a brighter future, we make our way there. You know, we look towards a continued mandate. We believe that this is the way that our relationship should move forward, and we will build from the strengths of the programs, the various projects across the country, and continue to improve upon the process. And as I said, my colleague Jolie Boucher from ECCC is here to tell you more about how you can currently access the federal funds to support your Guardian network, your boots on the ground. So, Kilanaskamatin, thank you for listening to me, and over to you, Julie. Egwese.
Hear me?
Maybe louder. You need to speak louder.
Okay, I've been having issues with my sound since this morning, so please, if I'm not loud enough, let me know.
Good now.
So first, I'd like to say miigwech Loretta for your kind words. And I'd also like to start by saying I'm honored to be able to speak today, because I know there's a lot of people who are interested in Guardians program, and it's great to be able to speak to Guardians themselves. And I'm also very honored to be able to say that I'm speaking to you from the lovely territory, unceded territory of the Algonquins of Golden Lake, which I'm honored and privileged to call home. So my name is Julie Boucher, and I'm the Director of Conservation Partnerships at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and have been co-chair with the lovely Loretta for the past 3 years of the Joint Working Group. And as she has said, it has been a learning experience, but an incredible experience to show us what we can do when we open our minds to the possibilities of working differently. And I can tell you that even within the department, it's been a learning curve for other groups who support funding proposals as we're asking them and to be flexible and to stretch and to change the way they do things to better match what our partnership entails. So know that's been a learning experience on both sides. So I'd like to bring your attention to something that is going to be put on the screen. And I believe Bart will do that for us. And it's a placemat. And it may be small for some of you, but we'll be sharing it after this quick talk. So you'll be able to access it. And the reason it may be better to access it when you receive an actual copy is a lot of the information on it is actually linked. So the idea is through another committee that we hold with other federal departments called the Interdepartmental Guardians Managers Committee, we tried to put together a list of different types of funding that you may be able to access to support your guardian-like activities. We understand it's very difficult to navigate the complexities of federal funding and how everything seems to be piecemealed. And in order for your community to do their whole their whole project, they often need to go to 3 different sources of funding in order to get the full amount required to take a holistic approach to implementing your initiative. So the idea of this placemat is we wanted to offer you an opportunity to see that there are other sources of funding throughout the federal government that you may access to help support your Guardians initiative. So you'll notice that we've divided it in lands, species, climate, and at the far right bottom portion there, harvesting and impact assessment. And so in each of these, you will see that we've labeled with some little flags in the corner to identify, for example, envelopes that would be available for all, envelopes that are available for First Nations particularly, envelopes that would be available for other groups such as Inuit or Métis. And we provide a bit of information there. Now, it's important to understand we didn't put details like open and closing dates for proposals and things like that. And we encourage all of you to click on the Learn More online links to go visit those individual programs to see when their deadlines may be and if it fits what you're looking for. But the idea was to give you sort of a more whole of government approach of all the funding available out there. What we're going to do through the Managers Interdepartmental is try to keep this placemat up to date and produce it regularly so that you may have sort of a place where you can go visit. And we're looking for somewhere to house this, and we thought we'd talk to the ILI to maybe put it on the Land Needs Guardians site because the restrictions are less than the federal government for posting things that are more interactive. And we thought maybe that's a good place to start, which is probably where all of you should go to get some information related to guardianship. Other things are, as you probably have heard, Miles mentioned it as well, there is potential for further funding for Guardians and Indigenous conserved and protected areas through the budget announcement 2021. Now we're still trying to clarify what that means, and we still need to make sure that the budget is approved before we can start talking about this. But know that there's potential for additional funding that we will work with the joint working group to determine sort of immediate management, and then take a look with the ILI and the business case that Miles just spoke to you about of setting up, or at least starting to set up the First Nation Guardians Network. We're really excited about supporting this different way of doing business and looking at alternative third-party delivery mechanisms for federal funding, and think that this is a great opportunity to do so. Additionally, there are some other funding pockets that are not mentioned here, but that some of you may have heard of, which we'll be communicating to you through the joint working group related to Nature Smart Climate Solutions, which is funding that came out of the announcement on 2 billion trees, for those of you who have heard that. So the joint working group has expanded its mandate somewhat to help out with that funding as well. And the great part of that is that that funding will be way more meaningfully allocated to proposals that will help sort of restore areas that will be able to house and sequester greenhouse gases. So very excited about that. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, and please feel free to forward to the Guardians inbox any questions you may have, including questions on this placemat. And in closing, I just would like to say, Val, that the federal family is also thinking of all of you during this difficult time with the discovery in Kamloops, and that our hearts go out to all of you as parents, as partners, as human beings, and so we're thinking of all of you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just need to say something as well too. I need to say it's important to me as well. I want to acknowledge a late friend of mine who gifted me with this necklace, and who was a residential school survivor, and left his words on paper, and was a big participant in the Indigenous protected areas, and is now a guardian in his own right in the York Factory First Nation. You know who I'm talking about. Thank you.
Wow, Chinishkubit, thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to explain, the great work of the joint working group. For those who, we'll be talking a little bit more about the joint working group tomorrow, but the dedication from the members cannot be understated. There were members who were working on their holidays, like literally from Disney World, to make sure they were reviewing proposals. The number of proposals that were received by the Secretariat totally eclipsed expectations and capacity, frankly. So that meant that the members themselves just stepped up because they just were so determined to make sure that you and as many of you could receive funding for this good work as possible. So I do want to highlight that, and that's been done under Julie and Loretta's leadership. So thank you for that leadership, and we're proud to be partners here. At this time, I am going to attempt something that we normally don't do virtually, and that is to kind of get a feel from the room about whether or not you agree as guardians to the joint working group continuing its mandate for an extra year while we negotiate and figure out the shape of the network. And that'll do two things. It'll allow them to finish as a joint working group through to the end of the evaluation of the program. Julie and Loretta didn't spend very much time on this, but those programs are being evaluated as we speak. And that evaluation is being led by a group named Firelight. And there's a number of Indigenous kind of design processes that are there, and we're ensuring that evaluation includes an Indigenous definition of success. So the question is up in front of you. Do you agree to extend the mandate of the Joint Working Group for one more year? This would allow them to finalize the pilot evaluation and implement the initial investments that could flow from budget 2021. We do not know whether those investments may flow this year, but I know that there are some efforts being made within the government to see what they can do to get that money out sooner than later. And then the final piece is about what Julie mentioned, which is the 2 billion tree planting goal that has led to a fund called the Nature-Based Climate Solution Fund, of which part is managed by Environment and Climate Change Canada for habitat restoration. And the group that runs that program has turned to the Joint Working Group for their help and seeing if those funds could be directed towards guardians. And I can't think of a better reconciliation move on behalf of Canada or for Canada than to fund guardians to help restore their landscapes from the damage of colonialism and industrial development. Yes, 2 billion trees, Nijitsul. Not quite enough, but enough to start to restore habitat. So we'll leave it up for another minute or so. I'm seeing the results come in, and I will share that with you in a second. Keep them coming in, folks. There's 194 of you online. We've gotten just about 100 responses. Right on. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to call it, I get the sense from the room that we have general support. In fact, we have 107 have voted and 99% of you agree to extending the mandate of the Joint Working Group. Thank you so much for indulging us in this moment. We just wanted to make sure that you all recognized and understood the work of that Joint Working Group and have a chance to support that work or not. Okay, so let's share those results. If you could see them, there you go. Those are the polling results. The person who said no, please get in touch with us and let us know what you're thinking and your thoughts are. We certainly don't want to kind of overwhelm you with the general support that you're seeing here, but I'd like to understand your non-support if you're willing to do that. You can email at info@ili.ca with that answer. So thank you very much for taking that moment. Joint Working Group, you now have a mandate to move forward. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dati.
Thanks, Val. So we have a photo story to share with you all. So tech team, if you could just pop it up for us. So Ashley is living the Guardian life, let me tell you. She texted me this morning from a spot device, and she's in the middle of chainsaw safety training, and she couldn't, she had planned to try and get away to share her story and Zoom in with us, but it just didn't work out. So on her behalf, I'm going to share a few words about her photograph. So this photograph is from a land-based program that Ashley ran with her guardians last summer, last August, I believe. She ran an Idiji moose hide tanning camp where she invited people to come and learn about the protected area while also engaging in moose hide tanning. So it was a way to build cultural identity, create community connection, and share information on the protected area. In the background, you can see one of our Idiji guardians, that's Henry Sabarin from Deka Kotene, helping with the moose hide. So must see to Ashley for sharing her photograph. I wish you were able to join us so you could have shared this story in your own words, but happy training. And with that, we are going to take a short break. Actually not a short break. We are on time today. We are going to take our 15-minute break. So please get a drink, eat something, use the bathroom, move around, go outside if you can, and come back for 11:35 so that we can have a wonderful fireside discussion with Minister Wilkinson and the Guardians. Masi.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a chance to have a bit to drink, stretch your legs. I find long days on Zoom are very tiring if you don't have a chance to do that. All right, we're going to go into our next session, just as my animals have decided to be very active for some reason. Sorry about that. And we're very, very pleased to welcome the Honorable Minister Jonathan Wilkinson with us today, as well as his fellow panel members, Lisa Young, Jimmy Morgan, as well as Chief Heidi Cook and Chief Gordon Planis. If we could tech team, make sure they're all ready. Chief Cook, thank you for joining us this morning, Minister Wilkinson. Before we begin, I will take a moment just to read the biographies. I'm sure that many of you know these folks on the screen, but just in case, we'll start with the Minister. The Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson has served as Member of Parliament for North Vancouver since 2015. Raised in Saskatchewan, Minister, I'm also a Saskatchewan-born child. Minister Wilkinson spent more than 20 years in the private sector, holding leadership positions with a number of companies dedicated to the development of green technologies. His work as CEO of both Quest Air Technologies and the former Biotech Environmental Technologies, now BQE Water Inc., in addition to his role as Senior Vice President on Business Development with Nextera, provided him with extensive experience in the energy and environmental technology sectors. He's also previously worked at Bain & Company, a leading global management consultancy. As a Rhodes Scholar, Minister Wilkinson made use of his educational background in public policy when he worked as a constitutional negotiator and federal provincial relations specialist for the former Saskatchewan Premier Roy Romanow. He served on several industry and charitable boards, including the United Way of the Lower Mainland and the BC Technology and Industry Association. He also served as a board member and treasurer of the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation, a foundation that has funded some of your work as guardians in the audience. Mr. Wilkinson has deep roots in North Vancouver, where he's raising his family alongside his wife, Tara. Lisa Young, thank you for joining us from Mi'kmaq. If someone told Lisa Young 20 years ago that she would be the executive director of the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, she might have thrown you out the helicopter she was in, doing a survey for moose populations in Cape Breton. In those days, the Unama'ki Institute for Natural Resources hadn't even started, and Lisa was a young biologist fresh from her studies at York University. She's working as a field technician doing research with Parks Canada and the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources on moose in the Highlands. Moose in the Highlands in Cape Breton is a fascinating topic, and if you want to do some nerdy reading, check that out. It's really actually interesting how the moose behave there. Little did she know at the time that UNIR would grow into a leader in Mi'kmaq natural resources and environmental issues. This did not happen overnight. And from the beginning, Lisa was involved in writing and developing proposals for initiatives such as the Aboriginal Aquatic Resources and Ocean Management Program, Hardwood Forest Management, and the Natural Resources Officers Program, and the Mi'kmaq Natural Resources Mapping Program. For 6 years, Lisa was UNIR's General Manager and Director of Administration before becoming the Executive Director in 2006. One of the highlights in Lisa's training was participating in Aboriginal Leadership Management Development Training at the Banff Center. As ED, Lisa's job includes assisting staff in project development and management, as well as participating in developing UNIR's overall objectives and direction. When she's not wearing her UINR hat, she enjoys family time with her husband, Buddy Young, and their children, Maria or Mariah? Mariah or Maria? Mariah, perfect. And Spencer. Jimmy Morgan is a Gitwangak Eagle clan member. Is that how you say it, Jimmy? Working for the Gitniao, and brings many years of experience as a guardian supervising field technician, monitoring wildlife and fisheries, to his current work supporting guardian programs in his own nations and that of other First Nations. He works as part of the Federal First Nations Joint Working Group on Indigenous Guardians, and he's also a member of the Nature United's technical support team for guardians, where he brings years of experience in every aspect of guardian works, from boots on the ground and in the water to crew supervision, operations, and program management. Chief Heidi Cook. Heidi, I'm so pleased that you're here. Heidi's a good friend. We traveled across Northern Australia a few years back, and I'm very pleased to see you have become chief of your community. She's from Mississipauistic, or Grand Rapids in Manitoba, and is the chief of Mississipauistic Cree Nation. Her interests include the protection of lands and waters, understanding and strengthening treaty relationships, cultural teachings and ceremonies, and living a good life. Cook most recently worked with the Mississipauistic Cree Nation's traditional lands and waters in the area of land use planning and management. She holds a bachelor's degree in arts and environmental sustainability and politics, and a master's certificate in project management from University of Winnipeg. She received the Duff Roblin Scholarship that allowed her to enroll in the Masters of Development Practice in Indigenous Development. She continues her work with Indigenous communities in Manitoba to achieve development that is just, improves opportunity for health and development, and ensures lands, waters, and rights are protected. And Heidi was instrumental in the initial creation of Mississipauistic's Guardian Program. So welcome, Heidi. And last but not least, of course, Chief Gordon Planis. Gordon's traditional name is Hayakwacha. You're going to have to correct my pronunciation on that, Gordon. Named after his grandfather from Chianu, the Salmon people. Gordon has been elected chief of the Tock Nation for the last 10 years, where he sits on many boards encompassing the Salish Sea. He's previously been a logger, a commercial fisherman, a pipe fitter by trade, and a backcountry operations manager with the Pacific Rim National Parks Reserve. Gordon is a Coast Salish artist and carver, traditional singer, and captain of the Tock traditional dugout canoes. Gordon and his wife Marcella live in the village of Siaosun. Again, you'll have to correct my pronunciation. The West Coast pronunciations for me here. What is it?
Siaosun.
Siaosun, great. And they have 6 children and 6 grandchildren. He's actively working closely with the community in renewable energy, food and water security, Coast Salish language revitalization, and economic development. And of note, Gordon and Lisa were both members of the Indigenous Circle of Experts, who advised Minister Wilkinson on the definition of Indigenous protected and conserved areas. Okay, now all that is done. This is how it's going to work. So we're going to open with Minister Wilkinson, and I understand, Minister, you're ready to give us just a few thoughts and words. And then what we'll do is we'll turn to the other panelists who have all prepared their own openings, but those openings also include a question that they would like to pose to the minister. So that's how it will flow. Minister, then each one of the panelists who will tell their own stories and ask their question, and hopefully that'll generate good conversation. And of note, unfortunately, we're not in a position to take questions. This session is quite short. Unfortunately, the minister has to go to question period. immediately after this session. So we will, of course, wish the minister well at that moment and continue the conversation, but we will not be taking questions from the audience at this time. So without further ado, Minister Wilkinson, thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Great, thank you very much. Hello, bonjour, Tanoya. I am certainly pleased to be joining you from North Vancouver, which is, as you folks will know, located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I would like to just start by acknowledging last week's tragic news, the discovery of 215 children's remains at a former residential school in Kamloops has impacted Canadians across the country. And I would say we are all in mourning. The reverberations of the residential school system continue to be felt by survivors, by their families, and by many, many communities today. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities have demonstrated how resilient they are, but we have much work to do and much distances to cover to repair the damage, to address the centuries-old wounds, and to begin a path towards healing. Our government is committed to walking this path of reconciliation. We know that it is not, and it will not be an easy journey. One example of steps being taken is the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Today, 2 years after the final report from the National Inquiry was presented to the government, the National Action Plan has been finalized, and this is a step, in my view, towards ensuring the safety of Indigenous women and girls today and into the future. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes ici pour parler d'un autre pas vers l'avant, même si c'est un petit pas dans ce chemin vers une relation renouvelée basée sur la reconnaissance des droits, le respect et la coopération. Indigenous peoples have been stewards of this land since time immemorial, and it is abundantly clear that we have much to learn from Indigenous peoples when it comes to conservation. I think this is particularly evident when we see the environmental challenges that we are facing in the world today: rapid climate change, significant and accelerating biodiversity loss, and the cumulative impacts of pollution in our natural environment. C'est pourquoi j'ai hâte d'entendre ce que mes collègues panélistes ont à dire. Guardians ensure there is a reciprocal relationship with nature, that key natural values are maintained or enhanced. They also contribute Indigenous knowledge and science, help inform decision-making by their nations, and support intergenerational sharing of knowledge by helping to train the next generation of stewards of the lands, educators, and leaders. Guardians provide connection to the lands and waters, which makes the Indigenous Guardians program in many ways a healing program. Et je reconnais leur importance pour fournir un contexte permettant de renouer avec la terre et la culture. Guardians are an essential part of Canada's path forward, both for protecting nature and working towards a renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples. This is certainly evident, I think, in the work of the Joint Working Group, who have made enormous strides in designing a model that supports Indigenous leadership in stewardship. To date, the Indigenous Guardian Program has funded over 55 initiatives with about $8 million, enabling Guardians to act as the eyes and ears on the ground from coast to coast to coast. And today, I had the pleasure of announcing another $600,000 for 10 additional projects for Indigenous peoples across this country. These initiatives will enable First Nations to monitor ecological health, maintain cultural sites, and protect sensitive areas and species while creating jobs in communities. As many of you know, the recent budget 2021, invested a historic $4.1 billion additionally in nature conservation and protection. A portion of that will go towards further supporting Guardians initiatives. And I certainly look forward to working with many of you in this room on moving that forward. L'énorme contribution que les peuples autochtones continuent d'apporter à la gestion de l'environnement et au développement durable est inestimable. Here in Canada, we are blessed to have vast and varied landscapes, rich with majestic mountains, beautiful lakes and rivers, and thousands of species, including an extraordinary range of birds, mammals, and fish. Through the Indigenous Guardians Program and through establishing Indigenous protected and conserved areas, it is clear that restoring balance to our ecosystems cannot be done properly without the help of the type of people joining us here today. And so with that, I certainly look forward to hearing your insights and stories and to continuing this important discussion, the work that we are doing together. Thank you. Merci. Wachuyo.
Minister Wilkinson, thank you so much for those opening thoughts. At this time, we didn't even decide on an order amongst the other panelists, so I'm just going to wing it, and hopefully you guys are going to be all right with that. So I'd first like to turn it over to Lisa. As a fellow East Coaster, it's a little bit later over here. Let's go there. So Lisa, can you tell us a little bit more about your work at Unamugi and the importance of guardians, and pose your question to the minister?
Yes, thank you, Val. Minister Wilkinson, in Nova Scotia, the Mi'kmaq have been working very closely with both the provincial and federal governments on the implementation of our treaties. So this relationship being built on the understanding that we are all treaty people, that each of us has a role in upholding and honoring those treaties that we've entered into on a nation-to-nation basis. And Minister, as you alluded to in your open remarks, for the Mi'kmaq, the path to strengthen our nation has very much been grounded and guided by our traditional values and belief systems. So our approach to resource management, or as we prefer to talk about our land relationship, is based on traditional concepts like Nunavut. And Nunavut simply tells us that it's possible to use the gifts of the Creator to provide for one's family and community without jeopardizing the sustainability of those resources for future generations. So these Indigenous knowledge systems, they are the original nature-based solutions, and they hold the key to addressing issues such as climate change and biodiversity loss. So these systems that are informed by our knowledge of the land and how we use this knowledge is guided by the love and respect that we have for that land. And so guardians are essential and play an important role in maintaining that relationship. They are not only the eyes and ears for our nation, but they are the voice of the land as well. It is this reciprocal relationship with the land that shapes us as a nation and ensures our actions uphold that sacred responsibility that we have to the land. So all that to say, Minister, that the Guardians play a key role in revitalizing and maintaining our traditional knowledge systems, allowing us to exercise our inherent rights while upholding our sacred responsibilities. So knowing then the important role that the Guardian program has in helping to strengthen our nations, and the commitment your government has made to enter into a nation-to-nation process for establishing programs such as the Guardian Initiative. What is your commitment to furthering this nation-to-nation relationship?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And I actually was struck by one of the things that you said there, which was Indigenous knowledge are the original nature-based solutions. I think that's actually entirely true. As I said in my opening remarks, the way in which Canada, but not just Canada, many nations or many states around the world have been treating the natural environment is not sustainable. We have seen, precipitous decline in biodiversity because of the way that we have managed lands and forests and a range of those kinds of things. It is not something that can continue, both because it just shouldn't, but also even for the long-term health of the human race. We have to actually think more about how we are going to do this in a more sustainable way. And I think we have much to learn from Indigenous peoples in that context. And so working on a nation-to-nation basis is very important. I think the joint working group that has been working on the establishment of the Guardians program is a good example of that in terms of ensuring that we are hearing from each other and working together in a manner where we are striving towards consensus about how do we move forward, and that we are learning from each other. And certainly we are committed to that, both with respect to the Guardians programs, but certainly with respect to Indigenous conserved and protected areas, which have been enormously powerful in moving forward in Canada on the nature agenda. And also with respect to Parks Canada, where there is a legacy there that's a challenging legacy in many areas. But certainly some of the more recent examples like Tai Dene and others, where these are co-managed for the betterment of nature. So I'm very excited about the work that I think we can do together going forward.
Thank you very much. And Jimmy, as a member of the joint working group and having been in those circles, I imagine you've got some perspectives for us. Would you like to share those at this time?
Sure. Simgiget gan Sigidamanak, Amahihlu and Anasa. Chiefs and matriarchs, good morning and good afternoon in our respective areas. I am Hlik, which means squirrel. I am from the Laskik or Eagle clan. I hail from the house of Sagamigak. I am a Gitxsan from northwestern British Columbia, and my English name is James Morgan. I've been working with the Gitnya hereditary chiefs for approximately 13 years now, officially 7 years as a guardian, but mainly fisheries and wildlife background. To me personally, the guardian is a bridge. The guardian is a bridge that connects Indigenous knowledge with scientific methodologies. The guardian is also a conduit that houses and channels the two towards a tangible solution. Together, Indigenous knowledge with scientific methods can and will assist our leaders on both sides of the negotiating table. Just as the Western world leans on their science, we lean on our guardians to assist our leadership in making these choices. Canada's leadership on addressing climate change and biodiversity at the global level is essential, as you've noted. My question is twofold. What is your vision for the role of Indigenous peoples in Canada in assisting Canada in furthering this leadership? Also, how will Indigenous-led conservation be reflected in Canada's strategy for meeting its goals?
So those are big questions, and you've noted both climate change and biodiversity loss, and those are, as you know very well, they are intimately connected, but they're also, in some respects, at least solutions are somewhat different. So let me take each of those. I think certainly with respect to nature and biodiversity and conservation protection, I think our government has been very clear that we need to be working on a nation-to-nation basis in partnership with Indigenous peoples to ensure that we are making the kind of progress that we need to make to stem the loss in biodiversity. I think the federal government and Indigenous peoples are very much aligned in terms of what we need to do. I think sometimes we need to encourage our provincial and territorial counterparts about how they can assist in ensuring that we're moving towards the kind of protection that needs to happen if we're going to save the species that are very much in decline. And so the concept of Indigenous conserved and protected areas has been enormously powerful in Canada, making the progress that it's made over the last 4 years. And that ranges from, the protection of the Jumbo Valley in British Columbia to Taluyuptupemanga with the Inuit in the north. It certainly relates to the protection, for example, of certain areas in central British Columbia in conjunction with West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations that is about stemming the decline in southern mountain caribou populations. And so I see Indigenous leadership and working together in a respectful, cooperative relationship as absolutely essential for us to actually make the progress we need to make on nature. And as you know, we have agreed with other countries in the world that we need to get to 30% protection of both terrestrial and marine areas by 2030. That's not going to be easy. And it will require that we are working to try to encourage the provinces to come along with us. But we will not get there if we don't work together on that. In the context of climate change, obviously climate change is also linked to biodiversity loss. I mean, if you think about Pacific salmon, which you would know the issue very well, part of that is related to the warming oceans and rivers. So we need to take action on that as well. And certainly in the context of the development of our climate plan, and right now we're working on the development of what's called a nationally determined contribution, which is what we have to submit to the United Nations. We are working with all of the national Indigenous organizations. We have tables on climate to work together to ensure that we actually are doing the kinds of things that are going to be a benefit with respect to climate, but also a benefit from an economic perspective for Indigenous Canadians and for Canadians across the country. So again, I think Indigenous leadership and participation, active participation with the federal government is extremely important.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to push you a little bit on that one. What does that actually look like for you to consult with us vis-a-vis your position internationally? And how can we, add our voices to the pressure? Because the reality is Canada has to lead on both of those issues. And if it doesn't, the globe is in a much worse spot. So, and we're eager to engage at those levels. So what does that look like for you?
Well, it probably looks like a few things. I often say to folks who say that to me is, well, the first step is put your hand up and say, I actually want to be part of the process, because I'm always willing to talk to people who really want to be part of that conversation and finding out how we can actually work together to advance it. I would say with respect to conservation, a lot of the work, the actual work with respect to conservation is about local communities. It's about local Indigenous communities saying we want to ensure there's appropriate protection for these areas for our communities, for the biodiversity that lives there. And we are willing to partner with any Indigenous community that wants to put its hand up and have that conversation. Ultimately, we obviously need to involve the provinces at some point, but at the local level, in terms of informing, things like the submission to the United Nations, we work often with the National Indigenous Organizations, so with AFN and ITK and the Métis National Council. But certainly we are always open to hearing voices and into ensuring that we are thinking about those in the context of the work that we are doing. I would just say, come and talk.
Great. Well, I'm getting texts and question and chat responses that folks are eager to do that. So I have a feeling, Minister Wilkinson, you will be hearing from this audience on those two files. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Gordon Planis. Chief Planis, of course, you've dedicated much of your life in the last few years to really working with the Government of Canada to help shape some of this stuff. And I just wanted to note that that we all appreciate your sacrifice and efforts on all of our behalfs in your participation to those processes. Thank you. What is your question for the minister?
Yes, I'd like to say a couple of things right from the start. We are the protectors of the Western Gate. We are the Coast Salish. We are Douglas Treaty signatories in 1850. We have a birthright of taking care of our territory, and a part of that birthright is enhancement. And before contact, for hundreds and thousands of years, people across this whole country of Canada enhanced their territories. It was a responsibility handed down from our ancestors. And I could just think about the newcomers that came here, and they seen a country that was just unbelievable how it flourished. And a short time of 100, 150 years, that really turned the other way, and actually to resource extraction, where it compromised our watersheds, the four-leggeds, our roots, shoots, and berries. Our food forest is so important to our people, to our culture, of who we are as Sauk. We just want to be Sauk. And in regards to that Douglas Treaty signatory in 1850, it was an agreement to work together in a co-management of taking care of our territory. And as the legacy of the Indian Act, I think over time, that changed that for us forever in regards to us being able to practice the old ways of our ancestors on our land, on our waters. But over the course of the last 20 years, that's starting to come full circle. And now we're coming to a juncture in the road where decisions have to be made, not just from the federal level. It has to be done from the provincial level and from the Capital Regional District, that, there's a big part of our territory that's under the jurisdiction of the CRD. And for us to do anything on our territory, we have to go through that process of jurisdiction. There's something wrong there. And the reason being is that limits us from the use of our own territory, having to go through going through these hoops of trying to take care of your territory. I think if you work towards a better Canada, we have to look at tribal parks. We have to look at IPCAs. I think we're out of balance right now is because of what happened in the last 150 years. I think for us to reverse those trends, you need to put together a plan of having all our people back to where they're supposed to be. I've told this to other people in the past. Canadians, they all own one house. Maybe they own two. Back in the day, our people owned 20 houses, but they're spread all over their territory. And it was a light footprint. We knew how to take care of it. And now with the approach we're having right now, and just thinking about where we're going to go, you know, specifically some existing parks have a legacy of colonial approach to establishment. First Nations were removed from these areas, prevented from practicing their culture. What is your vision for reconciliation in these legacy parks? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just start by saying that I certainly agree with you in terms of IPCAs and the need for us to be looking at IPCAs as a model. I would actually say that, you know, ICPAs and the concept of that has been co-developed. It is a model in the world. And I think that it is a critically important part of us being able to move the dial to the point where we actually are protecting enough of our space that we become sustainable, and we don't have 700 species in this country that are on the list of species at risk. So I agree with you. In terms of parks, I mean, the legacy of a number of the parks in this country is not a good one from the perspective of the relationship with Indigenous communities. And it's a story that I think many Canadians don't know, which is that in many cases, Indigenous peoples were dispossessed of their land, in some cases dispossessed of their homes. And essentially we created these reserves of these Canada National Parks. I was on a call probably about a month ago now, about the Wood Buffalo National Park in Northern Alberta with Indigenous leaders, and some of whom were telling the stories of how their families were evicted from the park and were not allowed to go back into the park. That is a legacy that I actually think Canadians do need to understand and know more about. But clearly we must think about that in the context of what we're doing with those parks going forward. And in many cases, that really needs to involve moving towards co-management of the parks, ensuring that we are working together collaboratively around the management of those kinds of things. In some cases, like Tainai and Nadaje in the north, looking at completely different models where it's Indigenous led. And so I think that, you know, Parks Canada, to its credit, I think the Parks Canada people, and you would know some of them because you worked at Pacific Rim National Park, have really understood that Parks Canada needs to fundamentally change how it has engaged with Indigenous peoples. And I think that is an agency that actually has made a lot of progress, but of course there's more to do.
Thank you, Minister. I'm just mindful of the time. I know you do have to run the question period. Would you happen to have 2 more minutes?
I can do 2 more minutes, sure.
Okay, thank you for indulging us. Chief Cook, over to you.
Thank you. I'm joining today from Mississauga Cree Nation. We are at the mouth of the Saskatchewan River on Lake Winnipeg, also known as Treaty 5 territory since 1876. And it's just an honor to be with everyone today, and nice to see everyone that I can see. I'm excited to see Jen next. At the National Gathering in 2018, I shared about the start of our Guardians program, and we've been going strong since then. I'm going to try and cut it short, mindful of the time here. So since then, our Guardians program has been operating and expanding. We have youth guardians. Young people are being mentored in land-based skills and monitoring. Our guardians are expanding to climate change indicators and other areas. And we're just not content to leave it at that. We're keep on growing, and the next phase of our work involves setting out the land relationship management plan for our territory. So we were previously engaged with Parks Canada on discussions of a potential national park, going back to the days before IPCAs were at the forefront like they are today. Unfortunately, that table has nobody at it today, but we've continued our work to build our governance systems, to develop our vision, and to prepare ourselves to move to the next phase of land stewardship. And we're doing this work because it's important within our own laws, and we will continue, but I don't want to let Canada off the hook either. I know that the work that we do to protect our territory also benefits Canada and helps Canada meet its international commitments. We've done it without government funding for a number of years. And at times the work that we do can feel a bit precarious. It takes a lot of capacity to continually chase different funding pots. So I know, as you know, Minister, the long-term funding for Guardians and IPCA management will be crucial for meeting your government's targets and sustaining them over the long term. So what is your vision for financing Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship into the future? Thank you.
Oh, Minister, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, I knew I would do that at some point in this conversation. Thank you for that. I don't know a lot about the circumstance that you're talking about, but I will ask about it after this in terms of the work that you folks have been doing and why we are not engaged. But what I would say is in 2017, the government, as you will know, put aside about $1.5 billion to make progress with respect to conservation and protection. And a good chunk of that was really about establishment of protected spaces, certainly including Indigenous conserved and protected areas. In the most recent budget, there was $4.1 billion for nature. That wasn't all for conservation and protection of terrestrial areas. There was, for example, over $600 million for wild Pacific salmon, but there was about, I think, $2.3 billion for conservation and protection, including Indigenous conserved and protected areas, including additional funds for Indigenous guardians. And I think the commitment from this government is we will continue to fund those things as we move towards the kinds of conservation levels that not just we need to meet international targets, although international targets exist for a reason. It's to try to get to a point where we actually have a nature positive country, in the sense that we're not losing species, that we're not seeing species in decline, that we're actually going the other way in terms of building back some of the areas that we have disturbed and ensuring that we have sustainability in this country. I think in the longer term, and this is probably not a short-term thing, but we'd like to find ways to ensure that irrespective of what happens with governments at the provincial or federal levels, that there is ongoing source of funding to ensure that these kinds of things continue on. And I think in one of the parks, or one of the areas in the north, the protected areas, and I can't remember if it was tied to Nene or Adage, but there was actually a fund that was set up between philanthropic interests and the government that actually allows for the continued payment on an ongoing basis for the maintenance of the work that needs to be done. That's ideally where we'd like to get. We're not there now, but right now, the government has committed a big chunk of money to do exactly the work that you talk about that needs to be done. And we as the government of Canada presently are certainly committed to continuing that work.
Well, thank you so much, Minister Wilkinson. I know you have to run. You've got, I think, 3 minutes to make it to your next obligation, and we'll cheer you on in question period. Thank you for making the time in what we know is a very busy schedule. And we will, as the ILI, continue to engage with you. And
thank you very much. And thank you all very much for the work that you and your communities are doing.
Great.
Lucia.
Thank you.
Lucy.
Okay, panelists, we've got an extra 10 minutes to chat amongst us about what we just heard, what your perspectives are, your reactions. from the minister's presentation. Just note there are staff from the minister's office in amongst the audience, as well as some media. So just for your kind of information and context on that reality. But you know, what is your reaction to what the minister has had to say, Chief Planis?
We have work to do at home. I think we have work to do in all these territories across Canada. I think that there's a map we have to look at that's different from what Canada's map is, and that's the territorial map and why we're here. And I just think that the way things are right now, there's a lot of gray area, and it's never been resolved. Even in the Douglas Treaty, there's treaties right across this whole country. The only ones in British Columbia are the Douglas Treaty. They didn't honor that. So how do we get back to that? You know, this gray area within the parks, you go up there, it says no hunting. That does not refer to us. We can hunt there anytime we want. We can go up there and collect. We can go up there and live. That's the gray area where people that live here in our territory and surrounding areas, Southern Vancouver Island, they're confused. They go, how come they get to do that and we don't? Well, we spend a lot of time having to explain ourselves, and we shouldn't have to. And the other part of it is that the responsibility handed down from the federal, provincial to the regional levels have to be looked at more seriously for everyone to understand who we are as South people and all the other Coast Salish that signed that signatory into the treaty. So right now there is areas that are confusing for everyone. And how do we get past those barriers? Here's another thing that I needed to say, and I don't want to take up too much time here. They want to plant 2 billion trees. Well, there's a lot of places in our territory that the forest is so close together that the deer don't even want to live there because they can't. It's too dark in there between the ages and the second growth of 30 to 80 years. So they move out of there because of predators, a whole bunch of things. They don't like it. We should be investing in biodiversity where you spread the forest out so you get more growth inside and you get those animals back up to where they're supposed to be. So we're out of balance, and the thing is we need to address that because, you know, all you have to do is look out the window and see it. You know, I see a bunch of geese flying by and they go to the middle of the basin. So we do have problems. The other part of it too is the federal government, you know, inside the basin, we're growing millions of oysters. And there is a provision within the federal government that we have to deporate the oysters because of pollution. Well, you know, when we go and deporate the oysters right now, that they're cleaner than after we get them decorated. So right now there's this piece in there that you know they want to be careful, but you know there has to be better communication. You know, like when you think about the environment, creating jobs, and look at First Nations, because what we do is we invest back into our territory. So there's a really something to look at on how we're going to look at economics in the future. So thank you, Aishka.
Thank you, Chief Planis. Jimmy, your hand up. Is that you want us to jump in? I'm guessing. Great on.
Really quickly, I just want to say that I feel like the table is set and filled with positivity as well as potential. We need to continue this hard work. The reality is that it is overwhelming, the amount of work that needs to be done. However, if we are able to work on our own territories collectively, we will succeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Chief Cook, what are some of your thoughts from this conversation?
I think the right intentions are being expressed. I think the work that we do is important for our own healing. The minister talked and acknowledged the mass grave that was uncovered last week, and it opened up a lot of wounds in our own community, and I know across the country. And we see the effects in our communities, in our families, our homes to this day. I think maintaining or reconnecting our relationships with the land is healing for a lot of our people, and going back to those natural laws and feeling the love that the land has for us, feeling the belonging in our space. That's the really important thing. And I think some of the intentions expressed by the minister can be supportive of that. I'm not sure what, $4 billion mean. It could mean a football field full of cash or whatever, but what is that going to mean on the ground? Is it going to be enough? I don't know, but like the words are there. Let's see the outcomes. Let's see real change happening and real support for our communities to rebuild and to have healing through this work. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future.
Well, speaking of the future, Heidi, please give your beautiful children extra love this morning. Walter and Oski, right? Am I right? Yes.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of meeting them both when they were very young, and so I please give them my best. Lisa, final word, over to you.
Yeah, no, just a lot comes to mind, and what Chief Gordon Plains has said about taking down those artificial lines within our territory are important. But I also think to some of the conversation we had as a panel in preparation for this talk about the need for taking down those artificial boundaries, you would say, also within the different federal departments. Because we had a good discussion yesterday about how he had mentioned the Guardian programs that were established through fisheries and DFO. And I had mentioned to you about how we wanted to be here today to celebrate all the things that the Guardians were doing and all the good work they're doing to reconnect to the land, and how we don't see the difference between land and water, and how all those years I know working with and UNR supporting our communities in Unamagi and their effort to advance the Guardian program, how the Guardians actually had to hide the fact that they were working on things besides fisheries because it was so restricted between that funding and what they wanted to do. And that was so inconsistent with the way we approach our land management. So I really do see a need for there to be more kind of different support from different government departments besides Environment Canada, besides DFO, to support the Guardians, because as Chief Heidi so eloquently put, that there's a sense of need for healing with the land as well. So even with your mental health and those kind of cultural and healing programs, the Guardians play a role in that in a way, because they facilitate and they can do programs that facilitate on the land and reconnection to the land. And that on the land programming is actually something that's very prevalent now in the health sector and in the mental health and wellness sector. So we have to look at this holistically. So there's so many different opportunities if we just kind of take away those artificial barriers in terms of who could be supporting Guardians and supporting this kind of work on the ground.
Wonderful. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you for being willing to sit on this panel and have this conversation. I think it's been a very rich one. I'm seeing great comments in the chat. Lots of appreciation for you all. So as you know, in honor of Chief Planis, I raise my hands up for you. And Chinishkavitnan, thank you very much on behalf of the audience for your time. All right, at this time, I would love to invite my friend and colleague Dati back onto the screen so that she can present our next section.
Thank you, Val. And thank you, Minister Wilkinson, Chief Planis, Chief Cook, Jimmy Morgan, and Lisa Young for sharing your strong voices on behalf of Guardian programs everywhere. That was a wonderful fireside discussion. At this point, I'd like to ask our tech team to introduce our next photo story and invite Jennifer Simard, who is the Director of OPG Relations for the Moose Cree First Nation in Ontario. So Jennifer, are you here with us?
Jay, I'm here. Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Hello, hello. Please share us about your photograph and the story that comes with it.
Well, I'll try and be quick, but I could go on and on. But this photo just makes me smile, right? Like I just see the joy in this young man's face. And yes, hello. It's so nice to see you guys on the screen before. Okay. It's so nice to see this young man's face here because he just caught this beautiful sturgeon, a male, in a lake from that had been diverted from its natural flows for 30 years due to hydroelectric development. No one had thought that sturgeon were still there. And, you know, we were ice fishing. I was actually with him here. And he thought it was a big pike. And this huge sturgeon came up the hole. If you could imagine bringing this up a little, 8-inch hole, it was an intense moment. The little ones ran away. They totally shocked. But I thought it was such a beautiful sign that, our ancestors are out there waiting still to come home, even though they've been disconnected from the so-called sustainable development. I was so encouraged to see this message come through the ice and say, hey, we're still here, and I'm so happy that we haven't given up on them as they haven't given up on us, and took it as a real sign that the work that we're doing is getting somewhere, and we're making our way back home, all together in different ways these days, but I think we're getting there. The work that I do is specifically attached to a partnership with, as you had mentioned, their Ontario Power Generation. It's a Crown corporation, energy company in our province. And we signed an agreement with them based on a grievance settlement. And we used the money, I guess, from that grievance compensation to invest in becoming an owner in a facility. So now we are 25% owners of a hydroelectric complex in our homeland, the Moose River Basin. And we negotiated an apology as part of that agreement. We asked Ontario Power Generation to apologize to the water and to our people, but we also stood with OPG and apologized to our homeland together. And in a very special ceremony, the water accepted our apology. And we took that with a lot of heart and a lot of trust that we were going to do the right thing. That acceptance of that apology is something that I'm still trying to live up to every day. And our partners, unfortunately, have faltered somewhat. And as we have this long history of agreements that don't get honored, it seems to be something we repeat. And we negotiated this great agreement to, work together in partnership. But we're still often faced with talks like the work that we want to do is out of scope, or that's not cost efficient, or that's not required for compliance. But as part of our partnership, we set up an elders advisory group, and their main thing for this partnership was we got to bring our young people. We have to reconnect with our land. We have to reconnect with our water. How are we going to look after our homeland without that connection being nurtured? So this picture also reminds me of young people, reconnecting with their land and having that love, just explode, like you just see in his face. So I think that battle goes on. We negotiate these current agreements. Implementing them is still a challenge because there is this 100 years of doing business and how things have been done that we're shaken up. And money is not the bottom line for us. We can hear in our quarterly reports of how much money we're making, but that doesn't make our leadership happy. They want to see our young people look like this and have stories to tell about how proud they are of their homeland and how much respect they've seen and that they're spreading, and that love that they're sharing. They want to see that. But when we see projects and dams continue to operate in the status quo, that dishonors that ceremony. I think back to the apology ceremony that spoke to a promise to do things differently. And that's what I'm happy to say. We found other partners in the meantime. We worked with a Wildlife Conservation Society. They've been really such a good ally and such a good friend to us. And we worked together on, this is a sturgeon project, but we're looking at how are the dams impacting. I had another picture, I'm not sure if both are going to show, but that we're going to show, we're trying to learn or put more information behind our understanding of how dams have impacted, you know, sturgeon who are still disconnected all across our land, who still can't get to their spawning grounds. But because it's not well understood, no one is taking action on it. And it's still frustrating these days that we need to find Western science to validate the traditional knowledge, like our elders have said. For instance, the fish, the sturgeon in our area migrate, you know, 300 kilometers. And, you know, biologists and provincial companies would say, no, that's impossible. And then within the first 3 months of our study, we've tagged a sturgeon. We found he traveled 300 kilometers within 3 months. And this is something that we've always known, but until we had that actual hard statistic to prove it, was it not taken more seriously, and mitigation and those types of plannings put into place. So it's even frustrating, you know, even WCS, our Western science partners, they recognize that, you know what, it's too bad. Why don't we just listen to you guys to begin with from the start? And you know, how much money would we save if people want to talk about saving money? It's tough, but I think that the positive intentions, like Heidi was talking about, is what really is fueling us to keep going. That love that we have for our land just keeps us going. We do get a little bit, I find like the people that work in the land-based stuff, we have to be, I don't know, I don't want to say that I go a little bit loopy sometimes, but I do get a little bit frustrated, and I don't want to let that anger take over me, but it's a constant battle. I'm so encouraged by others who are doing this type of work. I loved hearing that, you know, collectively, we're all going to get there if we we're all looking after our own homelands. And I'm glad, Shauna, you called to ask me to share a little bit of what we were doing. I know that we're not officially under the Guardian program, but I'm always happy to share some of the work that we're doing, and I'll try and keep it within 3 minutes. I'll cut myself off. Okay, yeah, this is the other picture. This was some of the young people we took out. Sorry, I'm just gonna go like 30 seconds. These were our some young people we took out this winter. We were supposed to have an actual in-person gathering, but because of COVID, we still managed to do some virtual training, and we got them on the land and taught them how to use ice augers, but they collected water samples, and they started making these observations about, okay, rivers, the water here is a lot more cloudier than this beautiful lake, which is the water's clearer. And then afterwards we sat around the fire in the teepee, and they started saying, we could do this and we could do that, and all these inspiring ideas of how we could better, you know, show respect to the land and have a more engaged community. And I thought, you know, if the resources were there to support these ideas, how far could we go? Because that potential is there. It just needs the support to be nourished and supported to be able to really blossom. So yeah, this was the picture. I just love seeing this. The young people always amaze me. I always get so, they help me so much to stay positive. You know, sometimes working with the older generation, I don't want to say I get a little bummed out, but I always find working with the young people, their passion is just so inspiring, and their insights are so unclouded by politics. And I really thank them, and I was so happy to work with them. But that's it for that picture. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Those were amazing pictures, and those were amazing stories that you just shared. I felt my heart well up into my throat when you talked about that apology ceremony to the land. What a powerful, powerful thing that was, I'm sure. In terms of young people, I mean, it's always been a goal of mine when I was working to build programs, to build a strong program so that there was opportunities for young people coming up, including my own children. So merci for sharing your voice. At this point, I'd like to invite one of our senior ILI advisors, Mr. Steve Nita, to join me on the Zoom here. Steve is a former chief of his community, Tlutsoke, and a former MLA for the NWT Legislative Assembly. Steve and his team successfully negotiated an establishment agreement for Thai Denenene in 2019. They were recognized by United Nations in winning the prestigious Equator Prize, one of the first in Canada to receive it. And Steve is also a part of the Indigenous Circle of Experts who released their historic report, We Rise Together. And Steve is here to moderate a panel on Indigenous protected and conserved areas. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Masicho Dati, Steve Nita Sulia there. Denende, he thought in the Tusky, don't think it. She near say, Shaditi, seen the Nike see. Near Nike see, no Skinner, or Boddington, or Nike. At a Massinis in nationality. My name is Steve Nita. I'm calling from Denede, also known as the Northwest Territories. Denede means land of the Dene. I'm currently in the Dragies territory of the Yellowknife Dene in the Yellowknife Northwest Territories. We have three excellent stories of IPCAs and three wonderful people to tell their stories. What is an IPCA and where did it start, you might ask? In 2017, I was asked to join a national committee. Chief Gordon Plennis and Lisa Young, the previous panels, were also members, along with eight others, Indigenous leaders and practitioners around managing traditional territories for their people. 11 of us, along with 9 or so federal and provincial territorial bureaucrats that work within the conservation area, we struck a committee called the Indigenous Circle of Experts. Our mandate was given to us to engage with Indigenous peoples in Canada and pretty much ask what type of relationships would you like to see for you guys to help Canada meet its international commitments under the HE Court to protect 17%. In doing that, we had 4 regional gatherings across the country and 1 national gathering. And from those gatherings, after engaging with Indigenous peoples in the different regions of Canada, we had 1 in the West Coast, 1 in the East Coast, 1 in the North, and 1 in Central South Canada in Winnipeg. It was very interesting process. The first half of the day was focused on rights issues, and we let that discussion happen. But the second half of the day of a 2 to 3 day gatherings, we started talking about responsibilities and climate change and why that's forcing the world and 160 some countries to protect 17% of their territories, terrestrial and inland waters, and 10% of their oceans at that time. Once we start talking about responsibilities, the energy changed in the room, and it was quite an amazing transformation. It was clear Indigenous people wanted to reassume the responsibilities to their territories, and if the ability to come do part of that was through their own designated, protected, and conserved areas, then that's great. Let's get it done. Let's move forward on it. And when we put the report together, that report was received very well right across the country. It wasn't accepted as a Canadian government report, but the Canadian bureaucrats have certainly engaged with that report. And that report, what we say is an Indigenous protected and conserved areas is one that is led by Indigenous peoples and as represented by their governments in whatever form their governments are in the different locations across the country. So it's got to be something that's led by the people and designated by and for the people, by their governments. And that the type of protected area or conserved areas is up to each of the nations and their governments to decide. My personal example is the Haida protected area that my community, supported by my region, Indigenous governments within the region, created. We created the Haida protected and conserved area. It was my elders that mandated that work to begin with, and through membership resolutions and observing our inherent authority to create laws, and also recognizing the natural laws with which we manage ourselves in our relationship with our territory. We combine all those to designate Haida Nene. It was an area of interest of some 50,000 square kilometers in a jurisdiction where mining is a key economic driver. So we figured we needed a partner that has a law that is respected within Canada by all levels of governments and industries. So Parks Canada became the target, and we engaged Parks Canada in a process of building relationships that eventually brought in the Northwest Territories once they assumed administrative control over Crown lands in Northwest Territories in 2014. To three levels of government, my nation and their government. Canada is represented by Parks Canada, and the government of Northwest Territories. Together, we created Haida Nene territorial protected and conserved areas using a territorial legislation that we helped draft, and the Wildlife Act to protect 12,000 some square kilometers of land, and with Parks Canada and the National Parks Act, 14,000 some square kilometers. There's equality there. There's, as I said, we as equal parties, we designated, we are governing it, managing it, and operating Haida Nene together. We use a Haida Nene trust fund that is owned 100% by my nation, where we raised 15 million in the private sector and got Canada to match it, and that's the revenues from that fund will finance the Tlusiged Nihat Dene, or their guardians, and all the administrative support that they need, including purchasing equipment and training, all the insurance and so on. So today, the Nihat Guardians is a full-time program. They have pensions and everything. It didn't start that way. We started the Nihat program in 2008 by piecing together different funding sources and building relationships with Fisheries and Oceans, different universities to do studies, to take baseline information and then measure against that baseline. Now it's a full-time program. So that's one example of what an IPCA is. The ICE report also generated enough interest to create a 7-year SHRC funded research project called Conservation to Reconciliation Project that ILI is a member of the leadership team, or leadership organization. I sit there as a representative of ILI, as a member of the leadership circle, along with Lisa Young and others. We also work with the Elders Lodge to help advance Indigenous protected and conserved areas and support Indigenous leadership. We have over 140 partners, most of them major NGOs, many federal government departments, universities, and Indigenous governments and nations, all committed to supporting Indigenous leadership in their role in creating Indigenous protected and conserved areas and supporting those initiatives in whatever form that they ask for support for. So that's you know, an example of the history of IPCAs, where it's at now, like the National Indigenous Guardians Network, we are ILI along to the CRP are moving an agenda forward to create a national Indigenous protected and conserved areas network where, like the Guardians, the practitioners can get together and create best practices and support each other. I imagine many of those practitioners will be Guardians themselves. IPCAs, to me, can play a foundational role in creating Guardians program. Some of us have huge territories. Running an Indigenous protected or conserved areas, or your own protected or conserved areas that is funded, you can create an administrative capacity to grow your Guardians network within your territory to meet the challenges of the day. Once you have that administrative body that's consistently funded and managed through the management of your IPCAs, you can grow your Guardians network to work with industry within your territories to combat climate change. This week, because of the news coming out of Kamloops, has been very tough on many of us as survivors and survivors, children of survivors of residential schools. And I use that just once now. I don't use the term schools anymore. These were institutions. The institutions that enforce and the implementation of the assimilation policies of Canada, the same type of assimilation policies used throughout the Americas, North and South America. These same policies that gave the governments and the citizenships of these governments the ability to abuse and try to kill the Indians and our children, took the same energy and destructiveness to our territories. And today, as we face the dual catastrophe of climate change and biodiversity loss, they sure are needing the surviving knowledge that we have as Indigenous people in our relationship with territories, and as expressed through the Guardians program, to look at ways to have better relationship with our territories. To me, what we are acknowledging, I guess, as Indigenous people knew since these institutions were created, that there are unmarked graves and many of our children and our ancestral children never made it home. Our homes are also places where damage was done and damage still exists. IPCAs and Guardians programs, to me, is a way to create a home and to manage or to reassume our responsibilities to our territories, to our communities, to our families, and to create a space where the descendants of those that survive residential institutions, to know that they have a homeland that they could always go back to, a space that's safe for our ancestral children to come back and their descendants. That's the promise of IPCAs. That's the opportunity for reconciliation to happen as we define what that means for us in each of our corners within this country. And even as we face climate change in different parts of the country, the roles of Guardians is going to be determined by the impacts of climate change. Even the technology that was used to identify those 215 little bodies in Kamloops, that technology can be used in my part of the country, in my part of the country in the Northern Hemisphere. We live in a country that's where we live on permafrost. These permafrosts are starting to melt. These permafrosts are covering huge quantums of methanes and carbon that could be released. These need to be managed. Guardians can do that using technologies like the ground penetrating radar and other modern technologies combined with our knowledge systems. So that's what IPCAs could be, and that's what Guardians, associated Guardians programs can and are in this country today. So today we have 3 excellent individuals to tell us about their stories from the Eastern Gate to the Western Mountains to the Northern, just south of the 60th parallel in Northern Manitoba. And I'm very happy to introduce Jillian and Stephanie. And Chief Joe, who was supposed to be joining us, is not able to do it. So Gregory will be taking over his responsibility in telling the story about the work that they're doing in Newfoundland and the Eastern Gate. And we will start with Jillian, and I'll ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce yourselves, your projects, and I think there will be a map of their area that they want to create IPCAs. And we asked all three of them the same 4 questions. Question 1, express the vision of your IPCA and how it's rooted in your cultural responsibility. Question 2, what role do Guardians play, or what role will they play? Question 3, reflection on the Guardians can make programs stronger. Oh, reflection on how Guardians can make programs stronger, or how without Guardians it makes stewardship leadership more challenging. And question 4, what do you see as the challenges and opportunities in implementing this IPCA vision? So with that, we're going to reverse the order. We started with the Eastern Gate in the last panel, so we'll start in the West with Jillian. Jillian, please introduce yourself and tell us the great story about the work that your people are doing.
Sure. Thank you so much, Stephen. Would you like me to also answer the questions now, or just do a bit of an introduction first?
Let's go with the introduction first, and then.
Sure. Sounds good. No, thanks for that. Hello, everyone. As Stephen mentioned, my name is Jillian Stavely. My traditional name is Missi, which means owl. And I'm calling into you today from Denikiah, from my traditional territory, more specifically in a small town in central Yukon called Faro, which is in the northern part of my ancestral territory. And I'm very happy to be able to be here with you all today to speak about a very important topic that's close to all of our hearts, I think, as panelists here today. And to provide you a bit more information about my work, I currently work with my nation to be able to help develop and implement the Cascadena vision for our lands and for our people. And it's not an easy feat. It takes a big team to work towards our goals, especially when we have a nation that is so vast. We encompass about 25% of the Yukon, 10% of BC, and even a small part of the Northwest Territories. One of the biggest goals we have today is to find meaningful ways for us to steward our lands in a contemporary context. So the work that I'm doing with Denikiah Institute, which is a Casca-run non-for-profit charitable organization, is to focus on our mandate. And it's not just about preserving culture, but living it and breathing life into our communities, where we're advancing our land guardian programs and our Indigenous protected area at the same time. Land Guardian Coordinator Tanya Ball from the Denananyata Land Guardian Network spoke yesterday, I believe, in another sharing circle about this. So I hope you were able to catch that as well. But one thing that I'll be speaking about today is how we're breathing life into our stewardship goals. And that's focused on the land and water-based protection that we can accomplish through the Indigenous protected and conserved area proposals. Ours is called Denek Kusan, and you'll see an image of it there. I like maps, but I also think it's important to recognize that Denek Kusan is more than a place or a region to us. It really represents a cultural storehouse that is situated in the heart of the Cascadena ancestral territory in BC. And it also happens to be one of the largest intact landscapes in the province. We call it Denek Kusan, which in our language means us as Casca. Our laws, our language, our land, our culture will always be here. But that will be true as long as our culture and our values are here and that they're safeguarded. And that's why we're trying to protect this Indigenous-led conservation initiative by protecting our land and our culture at the same time. Now, this area that you see in purple is around 40,000 square kilometers of land and water that's completely free of roads and development, and the ecosystems within it have nourished our communities for millennia. In terms of the scale and vitality of the proposal, it's definitely part of the significant contribution that Canada can make to those international climate targets that we need to address the global biodiversity crisis that our world is facing. So like I mentioned, it is much more to a place to us. It's our future, because our land and our water is us as Dene people. And therefore, Denek Kusan is really our hope for what reconciliation can look like. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists as well to talk about the common goals that we all have through the questions that you outlined, Stephen. Thank you. Kola.
Thank you, Jillian. What a great story. Huge traditional territory, and wanting to protect roughly half of, if I can see by the map. That's the story of Indigenous people. My friend Valerie Courtois would often say, if Indigenous people were given the pen in land relationship planning, 60% of those territories will be protected and will be preserved for future generations. Going east and northeast, I'd like to introduce my friend, Stephanie Thrassi. Stephanie is a Denisontina person like me. She's from the Sayuzi Dene First Nations in Tadoule Lake. Sayuzi meaning the eastern Dene, most easternly Dene, and I'm the most westernly northern Dene. And our tribes, our people stretch over northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and southeastern Northwest Territories. They're the Denisontina people, one of the largest tribes in Canada. Stephanie is one of the leaders and force and energy behind the Seal River Watershed Alliance work on protecting the Seal River to create an Indigenous protected area of 55,000 square kilometers. And Stephanie, please tell us the story about the seal and use those questions to tell the stories, please.
Let's see, Stephen, as he mentioned earlier, Stephanie Hushe, Dennis Oshina Hesley. My name is Stephanie Thrassi. My Denan name is Dalat Usaze. I'm named after a chickadee. So I come from a tiny community in northern Manitoba. We're actually the most northern in the province. We're right in the center. We're west of Churchill. We come from a community where we existed more north from where we are now. And in 1954, we were forcibly relocated from our lands, and we were made to live in Churchill, where it was not a good place for our community because we didn't have that connection to the land there, like we didn't have our connection to the caribou. So it's coming into this new light of IPCAs, it's a new way for us to be able to stand up and say that we know what kind of connection that we need to have with the people, with the lands and with the caribou. And we know that in order to be successful on the land, we need to take care of it. And we need to be good stewards of the land, because there was a time when our people were blamed for the decline in the caribou population. And because of this decline, the Canadian government decided they needed to move our people. They moved us to Churchill, where at least 1/3 of the population of my community died because of that disconnect with the land. This is the area here that was coming up. So 50,000 square kilometers is the area that we are hoping to protect with our IPCA submission. It's the largest in the province in Canada right now that has been funded by ECCC. area actually is a partnership between 4 nations and the Inuit in Arviat. So there is no other submission like ours in that we are combining nations to work together to collectively protect this area, because we understand how important it is to be able to work with our neighbors to be able to protect it, because we all have significant value in this area. As I was saying earlier, the caribou have their migration route through the area. The belugas spawn their babies at the mouth of the river. We have 23 protected, 23 species that need to be protected in the area. So it's a huge part of why we need to do this, because of our connection and because of listening and knowing what the land needs. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope I can't wait to hear more from everybody else and to continue sharing our story.
Thank you, Stephanie. These nations, with their support from the Inuit and from Arviat, are working through the Seal River Watershed Alliance, non-profit society that they've created as the vehicle to advance the Seal River Indigenous protected area. Now, going to the East Coast, I'd like to introduce my friend Gregory Jador, who's Guardian, working on developing relationships with provincial governments to create IPCAs and to manage those IPCAs. Gregory, please tell us your story from Newfoundland.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's evening time for me here in Newfoundland, out farthest east. It's a pleasure to sit on the panel. Chief Miso Joes will be here today, but he had other commitments that he had to attend to, so I'm filling in for him at the last minute. So I'm from Mi'kmaq First Nations. We're the farthest reservations in Eastern Canada. So I work in the Natural Resources Department here as their manager and counselor for the community. So we've been working with the provincial government and the federal government over the years on our FMA agreement that's in a process now, that's in its final stages within the minister and the premier to cabinet. So I have a picture there that highlights the boundary. So this is the FMA boundary that we're negotiating with the province. This was a negotiation that started over 10 years ago. Started out with industry kind of came in through the back door into our territory and started traveling over the intact land that's never been seen any industry or commercial activity. So some of the footprints there is just made by First Nations people. So what we're looking at here is a land base that covers over 466,000 hectares of land, which means that about 260,000 of that is going to be IPAs, Indigenous Protected Concern Areas for MFN. So like every other First Nations across Canada, there were challenges that we had getting to this stage, but working with the provincial government and federal government through funding over the year, getting the land guardians out and collecting some of the data of the land that was traditionally used and still is by First Nations people here. So we just had an announcement today on future funding for our project, and it is good that we're going to be seeing more funding over the next couple of years from the federal government, and that will benefit the continuous work. Having a first of its kind FMA in the province that gives First Nations people a real more say on the land with the provincial government on what happens, what's protected, how we harvest in traditional ways compared to industry ways. So yeah, it's exciting, and I think it might be the largest IPCA in Canada. I'm not sure, So it's over 260,000 that we're looking at and already get mapped out to be IPCAs.
Thank you, Gregory. These three proposed these projects that are been declared by the people these folks represent are three examples of what's happening across the country. In the last call for proposals through the Challenge Fund, there was 28 proposals that were funded. Through the expression of interest, there's over 160 expression of interest. So this is a movement that's growing, and it's growing leaps and bounds. But it's not without challenges, as the Minister Wilkinson indicated, there is challenges. We need to do better, build better relationships with provinces and territories. But when Canada is asking the Canadian people, Indigenous peoples, the provincial governments to protect 1 million square kilometers by 2030, I think it's we have a great opportunity to make all of that in Indigenous protected and conserved areas. But to get there, we need to address some of those challenges. I'd like to ask Gregory and then Jillian about the challenges that you're seeing in your relationship with the provincial governments. Gregory.
Always forget to take off mute. The challenges we faced over the years was getting the provincial government to recognize our rights to the land have outside of our reserve boundaries. Working and trying to do, as Hilbert Marshall always mentioned in his talks on the 2IC. And so that was a bit of a challenge for us, but over the last number of years, industry has agreed with Mi'kmaq First Nations to do a land transfer agreement that they will give up that portion of land to have more land closer to their sawmill that would be more economic beneficial for them. But the challenges over the years is having government on side to help to develop the FMA agreement. But it's hard in Newfoundland as we don't have no treaty rights here in Newfoundland, so it makes it a challenge for us. But working with government and teaching them the Indigenous way and learning from the science way and the political way, we kind of met in the middle, and the challenges is still there. We still face them, but they're being ironed out, and get them to have it as a 2IC and is seem to be moving forward a bit. But if you look at 11 years of negotiation, you kind of wonder why hasn't it been sooner when you have ministers and premiers that we went through about 3-4 premiers already agree with the concept of IPCAs and reconciliation, and having First Nations people have more control over land at a provincial level and a federal level. It is challenging to have them to see it as, we're not here to stop people from coming out to the land, but we're doing it more in a traditional conservation way that we can look after it for future generations to come.
Thank you. So there's a process that's there, relationships that's building, it's taking too damn long, but there's opportunities for reconciliation and to combine the knowledge systems to better represent the collective. Jillian, what's the story in BC?
Yeah, no, and well said, Gregory. I just kind of want to build off of what was already said and just note that since 2017, when you were talking about, Stephen, the acknowledgement that IPCAs were going to be part of Canada's push to meet those protected area targets, there has been so much enthusiasm around the approach, the Indigenous-led conservation approach, and the CASCA have obviously been a big part of those conversations. But for those that are establishing IPCAs, there still are a lot of big questions, and a lot of that is around laws and authority, what areas will count as part of that pathway to target 1? How are these areas going to be funded and monitored and enforced? So there has been many challenges and opportunities, but I think where there can be a restitution in all of this is in eliminating those challenges, but inevitably that will be determined based on the collective vision of our leaders in this country. So for us to make sure there's synchronicity there, we've been focusing a lot of energy in demonstrating that our vision, the Cascadenas vision, is good for the land, and it's good for British Columbians, and it's good for Canadians, because there's mutual benefit for everyone based on an Indigenous land ethic and models for protection. So I think we're realizing there's a big education component to IPCAs about informing the public and industry, interest groups, government, that we really need to reframe the way we look at the land. And we need to do it as if we're looking at as our children's, material and spiritual lives depend on it. And I personally feel that ethical duty to educate others of that way of thinking, because I personally want to be a good land guardian and a good land steward and a good mother. And I want to be able to protect the land and our ways of life in a community, because I know that we need to have that positive, loving relationship with the land. Otherwise, our people will continue their hurting, and they're not going to be able to grow into a strong nation that I know them to be. So it's really about changing the way we relate to and experience the lands around us. And for us with Benakaya, we really do see it as the survival of our nation. So the challenges we're facing really is in showing decision makers why and how we need to do this. And the buy-in that we're really trying to get is showing that that nation vision is there, and that we're going to build off of that. But we in our society, I think, really have a long way to go in getting governments to understand the importance of Indigenous value systems, because in Canada, our landscape is value laden and political, and hence why we're in a time where there's a constant renegotiation of what the land means to us. And our land and ways of knowing has been marginalized. And we want to make sure that we rectify that, so that there isn't this continual slow disassociation of our people from our land. And we're making sure that that stops now. So I really do think we are heading in the right direction, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done. But if we're doing it together, it's just far more powerful. So whether or not you're a land guardian doing survey work on your lands, or you're a negotiator working on the land relationship planning with governments, or even if you're an Indigenous political leader, you're pushing us in the right direction, and there's tremendous power there. So for us, even though we have been having a lot of pushback from government, we just know that we have our nation's vision in our hearts, and it's guiding our work every day to be able to show the law and policymakers in our country that there's more opportunities than threats for supporting IPCAs and land guardian programs.
I certainly got that right, and I think Canadians in general need to see the value of Indigenous leadership, and not only creating national Indigenous guardians networks, but to creating the protected and conserved areas. There's a report that just released by the Canadian Institute of Climate Choices. It reads, beyond its environmental threat, climate change is endangering public health in Canada in ways that will have significant human and financial costs, a new report says. The report, which was released Wednesday by the Canadian Institute for Climate Change Choices, estimate that the impact of climate change on health in Canada will add up to hundreds of billions of dollars, while drastically increasing hospitalization and premature deaths due to weather-related issues. And those are based on the numbers we've got. So, the work that we are doing as Indigenous nation, advancing Indigenous protected or conserved areas, protecting large, in a lot of cases, large ecosystems that are biodiversity rich. These are planetary impact size protected areas that we're advancing. 90% of all protected areas in the last 20 years has been led by Indigenous people. And as Stephanie indicated, her and her people and partners are advancing one of the largest in the country. Indigenous leadership comes in a lot of forms. So, I've been working with Stephanie and the Seal River Watershed Alliance for a few years, so I know the project intimately. And I'd like to ask Stephanie about the type of work that the Seal River Watershed Alliance is leading in building the case to create support for the Seal River protected area, Indigenous protected area. I know at one time we had over 14 working groups working over Zoom in the last during the COVID time. So Stephanie, please describe what type of work goes into creating the case for IP in an Indigenous protected area.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I've been working with the project for just over a year now, and that's kind of right when COVID hit. So I literally had maybe 2 months before the pandemic to really try to get in there and get community members involved and get them letting people know what we're talking about. Because it's not just one community that we have to deal with here. We're dealing with 4 in the province, and then we're dealing with 1 community in Nunavut. So I personally have only been able to go to 2 communities, and there's 4 plus RVIT. So our executive director has been able to attend 4 places. So since the pandemic, we've had to switch everything. Like our whole work plan, everything was designed to be in person, to go talk to people, to be educating them and finding out what the people want and what they need and what the voice of our project needs to be, right? Is the grassroots, is what the people want. And we've had to switch all of that to online. So it's been really, really tough. And that's been one of the big challenges that we've had to do, is to really try to just evolve and just kind of go with the flow of what's happening and try to utilize technology like we're doing today. But unfortunately, one of the other issues that we have in the north is that we have really terrible internet speeds, and to be able to jump on a Zoom call with communities is next to impossible. So to be able to do things like this has been really hard. But we managed to have a whole bunch of different working groups together to talk about 13 different strategies that we need to work on in order to come to establishment. So we the different areas that we needed to make sure that we focus on, different things that we maybe don't need to focus on right now but are important later, important post-establishment. So there's been that, and then midway through was decided by leadership that we needed to be driven and be pushed just by ourselves as Indigenous people. So they decided that we needed to incorporate and we needed to become a nonprofit that works together with each of these nations. So we became an alliance. So unfortunately, with a new project like this, we've had to build everything from the ground up, from all the policies, all the HR manuals, all of the really almost seems minuscule day-to-day things that we had to build from scratch. So that was really time consuming. And then you get down on yourself because you're like, okay, well, we still need to hire contractors for this, and we still need to do this, right? Think of the big picture of establishing. So then our friends at ILI were reminding us, actually, you guys have done a lot in the short amount of time that you've been working, because nobody else has had to create a project like this from ground up, whereas other organizations are relying on their community leadership to kind of be the basis for the work that they're doing. Whereas us, we have 4 different unique nations in northern Manitoba that we have to speak with leadership in 4 different places. And I need to constantly be emailing different chiefs and asking them their opinion on this and on that. And then so now the next thing we need to do is we need to build advisory committees from all of these areas. So we need to find a way to link these people together, like elders, getting them on Zoom. I'm still having a hard time trying to fathom this, because lots of these people don't have the internet that we need. So we're trying to think of new ways to do this. And we're just really hoping that some of this can die down soon, so that we can really do that really hard push and getting those voices for the project, and then lifting them up and pushing them forward, because we know that in order to have a strong future for our communities, we need to have a strong base, and we need to have both feet on the ground, and we need to have a place to practice our culture, to practice our healthy food that we need to harvest, and we need to be able to speak our languages, because we have 3 unique languages in the area, and to be able to empower all of these nations to do all of that at the same time. You say yanathe ho I desi denego de not said. So we want the future, the youth, to be strong, and in order to do that, you have to be strong in the land, and you need to have a connection there. So some of this, I totally am feeling all the other challenges that our panelists are talking about, but this is some of the small day-to-day stuff that we deal with that is really, that I see on a regular basis that we're affected with. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We are over time, folks. We got only a minute left, so I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing their stories, their opportunities that they have in front of them, the challenges that they have, and you know, by creating that network, by working together, we will meet those challenges, come out the other end stronger with two-eyed seeing and ethical space. So that's the opportunity that exists for us as Indigenous peoples. IPCAs and Guardians is a healing tool that and it's a reconciliation tool. The assimilation policy was created to take lands away from us and our responsibility away from not only to the land, but to our communities and to our families and to being as Indigenous peoples or Indians as they call it. We're reversing that through this type of work. The challenges are there, the opportunities are there. We just need partnership. Partnerships from Canada, especially from Canada, in the relationship building we need to do with the provinces and territories, because those are, they administer all crown lands in all of the provinces and territories except for Nunavut. The financial tools that we need to manage these areas is a challenge, but there's opportunities as well. Canada is finalizing its federal carbon offsets program. Many of the southern smaller IPCAs could qualify if the provinces and federal government work with Indigenous nations in addressing some of the drawbacks. The larger protected areas like the seal, with its tremendous biodiversity, as explained by Stephanie, you know, that 50,000 square kilometers has over 1 billion metric tons of carbon sink. Those need to be managed. If those carbon sinks are not managed and it's industrialized or climate change takes over and it starts spewing that 1 billion metric tons of carbon sink, that's going to be a problem. So we need to use national tools, international tools, so that we could use those tools to and allow the international community to participate in the paying for the cost of managing these places, because they're not going to be cheap. These are huge spaces, and we are in a changing environment. We got to do all we can to help each other to create the tools so that we may not have to look forward to a future where health is going to be impacted by the changing climate, death rates going up, and cost to the tax base is going to be extreme. So Indigenous knowledge systems, Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous leadership is essential at this point in time. And today's talk and this week's gathering really, I think, gives us good medicine so that we can imagine a better tomorrow. I thank you, panels, for sharing your stories, and to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative for creating the space so that we could all have these discussions and reflections. Masi Cho, enjoy your day.
Masi, Steve, Jillian, Stephanie, Gregory, that was just the most amazing discussion. I was hanging on your every word. I was sad to have you guys end your panel. So Masi Cho. To come into the conclusion of our day, we have a couple photo stories to share with you all. So I'm wondering if our tech team can please screen share Ms. Ariel Sanguiz's photographs. And Ariel, are you in our audience? Can you please unmute yourself and tell us about these photographs?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Welcome.
Perfect. Okay, so the two photos here that I am currently sharing are, I can't remember who that is. So on the left side, we have two of the Degagoti Edeji Guardians. And on the right, I think we have Henry and Richard, and they are all the Adege guardians, and I'm just going to pull up my notes here. So these guardians, so 4 of them were out patrolling and harvesting on the Willow Lake within the Adege protected area. And 2 of the Jimari River guardians had the opportunity to go out with the 2 local Degagoti guardians this past winter. And they were very fortunate to have harvested trout, northern pike, and whitefish in the Willow Lake. And in sharing these photos, they were using traditional ice jiggers to set these nets under the ice. And that consists of 1 long dry stick tied to another Y stick to string the fish net under the ice. And I found this so amazing to see through the Guardian's lenses, and the breathtaking photos that they show me when they're out patrolling and when they sit down and explain their experiences and the photos they've taken, and the traditional knowledge transfer and relationships built over time on the land with the with the elder guardians and the younger generation is something that I feel like is a treasure that is continuing on today with the aside from like the generation gap from the younger to the elder guardians that we have in the Decho region. And yeah, I just see so much beauty in the photos that they take through the Guardians lenses, and I just take pride in their work, and I just see it lighting up their eyes every time they come back. They're like, oh, we did this, we went harvesting, and then all the tracks that they see in the Adege, and I just found it really astounding and very proud of them and all the guardians of the work that they do out on the field, out on the land, and very, very fortunate to have these guardians out there on the land for us. So yeah, these are some photos that I thought that would be really interesting to share.
Thank you, Ariel. I know how important that intergenerational transfer is, and how that's a key part of the Decho Guardian program. So Masi for sharing those stories. Next is a photograph from Isabel Allen. She's a project forester with Wakwatoan in Ontario. Isabel, can I invite you to unmute and share with us a story?
Hi, quickly, Isabel Nadijnikaz Makwadodam. So hello, my name is Isabel Allen. I'm a member of the Temiskaming First Nation from Northeastern Ontario. I've been working for the last 3 years as the project forester for Wakwatoan, which is a development corporation owned by 3 First Nations in the Northeast Lake Superior region. If you were able to tune into the opening panel on Tuesday, you would have heard from our wonderful Guardians Program Coordinator, Amberly Kwakajizik. Our Guardians Program is really focused around connecting youth to the land. Since we live in an area of the boreal forest where forest industry is pretty prominent, a lot of our programs are forest-based. One of the key elements of our Guardians Program is birch. So we do birch syrup production in the springtime. And last summer, we were able to build a birch bark canoe in the fall. And we also learned how to make birch bark crafts throughout the summer. So this photo on the left shows me in the bush looking pretty happy after harvesting a big roll of birch bark. We learned that it was quite the process to find a tree that had the right quality and thickness of bark to be made into a canoe. So even though it took a while to find a suitable tree, I really enjoyed the experience of being on the land. Because unfortunately, a lot of my work has ended up being behind a computer. But it was so exciting to find the right tree and put down tobacco and harvest the bark with my coworkers. It really gave an appreciation of the way our ancestors would have used the resources on the land. And I think that made us more aware of the value of the materials that we were using while building the birch baskets in the canoe. So the photo on the right shows me wearing my Guardians t-shirt, standing with the canoe that our team built and some of the baskets that I built. Any of the birch bark or spruce spruce roots that we harvested that weren't thick enough or strong enough to be used for the canoe we used to build crafts like the birch baskets. Our teacher, Chuck Commanda, told us that an expert basket maker would be able to stitch a basket that was watertight. So I don't think mine have quite met that standard yet, but I enjoyed the creative process of decorating them. Overall, our Guardians Birch program was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my career and probably my life. And I'm excited to get back to Chapleau and start harvesting materials to do another build with our youth guardians in a few weeks' time. And I want to say thank you for inviting me to share today. I find the Guardians gatherings so inspiring and reaffirming that we're on the right path. So miigwech.
Must Isabel, that's beautiful story and beautiful photographs. It reminds me of the birch bark canoes I've seen made up here in Denendeh, along with the birch bark baskets that I've seen made here. So that's really nice to see those pictures shared. I'd like to take a moment now and invite Nijitso Norbert to join us and to share where she got with her graphic imagery for today. She's been actively listening. Welcome, Nijitso.
What an amazing day. Drinkwinzi, Hatsakwinzi, so good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Today, I've been doing a lot of deep listening, so there's actually not too much on the board, and actually all of Miles's Post-it notes are over here in their own category of a ton of Post-it notes. So that was such a fruitful morning with Miles talking about the story of the National Guardians Network. And I actually pulled 3 quotes here. So our Indigenous nations are going to be strengthened, and Canada will be strengthened by Guardians. As we build a proper nation-to-nation relationship, we also have to put importance on maintaining our nation-to-nation relationships among Indigenous peoples. And that is the key to success, is what he pointed out to us. Also, Val had a killer quote this morning. The nations will have the guardians that they need when they need them. And that was sort of the goal, that mandate of what this network has all been about. So there's going to be a lot more amazing quotes to come. Then we went into the overview of the joint working group and what their plans are to move forward. We heard from Loretta and Julie. And again, the nation-to-nation relationship as key to that working group. They've had a lot of challenges, but it's been fun and there's been a lot of progress. There was mention of how to access those funds and a table that was created. I looked in depth at those little notes and it's pretty amazing the work that's gone into that. So we'll feature some of that here. Next, we had some fireside chats with ECC Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, where we talked about the federal budget allocation and the Guardians program and IPCA. So we heard from Chief Heidi Cook, Chief Gordon Plenis, Lisa Young and Jimmy Morgan, and we heard some amazing stories about what that looks like for them, for their protection, but also those questions back to the minister and putting them on the fire and making sure that they know about the importance of this network. We then spoke with Stephen Nita about the stories of emerging and established IPCAs. We heard from Jillian, we heard from Chief Michelle Joe, we heard from Stephanie, and in that there was a lot of talk about the successes and challenges, but also, you know, there was just this really beautiful thing that Stephanie said. We want our future youth to be strong. And I think when we think about this program and as the work happens, I think that is, like, I get goosebumps thinking about the future for our youth. So I'll leave it there and you will see the final piece tomorrow. And just thank you so much for allowing me to listen deeply to these conversations again today and to visually represent them back to you.
Oh, Masi Najitso. I'll flag one little quick correction to the artwork while I have your ear. On our
Yes.
last panel of the day, Chief Joe wasn't able to join, so we had
yes.
Gregory Jador standing in for him. So I'll just flag that one for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Masi, I'm so excited to see where the art ends up for tomorrow and to be able to share that with everyone. At this point, I'd like to invite one of our senior leaders, Frank Brown, to join us to offer up some closing remarks for our day. Frank was a founding director of the Hiltzook Integrated Resource Management Department and a director of the Land and Marine Stewardship for the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative. He also supported the development of the Indigenous Guardians Training Program with Coastal First Nations and the Great Bear Initiative in Vancouver Island University. Frank is a leader in the Pacific Coast-wide ocean-going Indigenous canoe resurgence and served as an initiator and planner for the tribal journeys to Bella Bella in 1993 and 2014. And Frank, I thank you for joining us today and offering some closing remarks.
Yo, Nugwa gladly Asila of the Hiltzook East Eight and Gokwe tribes. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our young leaders, Valerie and Dati and the ILI and the whole team for doing this good work. You're almost through, 3/4 way mark here, and we'll be concluding this gathering. I want to thank the ILI for the vision to move forward with this Guardian gathering, even though we're in the midst of a global pandemic. I listened to the presentations today and it made me think about where I landed in my mind with regards to this metaphor of a decision tree, because the operating reality for many of us Indigenous place-based peoples is the proponents, various corporations, whether they're government corporations or mining energy corporations, covet a certain resource off our lands and our waters. And there has to be a mechanism for us to be able to get to an informed decision-making around these developments. And establishing guardians and the stewardship initiatives for First Nations is critical to support the nation building process, to add the necessary vetting that's required to fulfill our responsibility as not only the Indigenous place-based peoples of this land and the waters, but as the first stewards of this land. I want to thank Miles Richardson for sharing the background and history of the Guardians and also sharing the business case for Guardians. It was well researched, built on a foundation of a First Nations community vision of stewardship for this national First Nations Guardian network, a very strong business case. I appreciate the decision-making around the allocating of resources, which is rooted in respect, transparency, and accountability back to our communities. We heard from the joint working group who have to be credited for the dedication and commitment to this process, particularly the Indigenous caucus, who stepped up and went above and beyond the call. There was far in excess of the demand for what funds were actually there. And they had a very challenging responsibility to vet those proposals. And what it basically said was that there is an incredible demand within the First Nations community to step up and assert the responsibility to look after the lands and resources. In this process, it wasn't easy, as they said, the co-chairs of that joint working group, and how it was a relationship building and a learning experience. And that leads me to say that, you know, it's, even though we're talking about the First Nations of Canada and the government employees of the federal government coming together. Ultimately, it's human beings that have to come together and navigate the process together to come up with what's the best solution going forward, being under-resourced to come up with a plan to support this much needed financial resources to do this important work of protecting the lands and waters. This learning and collaboration has informed the need for an integrated approach in the next steps in an improved service delivery to First Nations stewardship across Canada. We heard in other panel sessions about how siloed some of these different programs are, and those silos and barriers need to be broken down in order for us to be more effective. And the gift of the collaboration of the joint working group has been exactly that. How do we work together in a more collaborative way? And they came up with positive solutions and are held up as a best practice on how to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation. And that didn't just happen by accident, it happened by design and because of a tremendous amount of commitment and work on both sides. The fireside chat with the Honorable Minister Jonathan Wilkinson from the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change spoke about Indigenous-led conservation. Indigenous knowledge is the original nature-based solution, as one of the panel members so eloquently said. The key issues of biodiversity loss and climate change need to be addressed in partnership with Indigenous place-based people. These are good words that were shared about collaboration, but what does that really look like specifically around resourcing Indigenous-led conservation through guardians and establishment of IPCAs across Canada? It was said the water and the land is our medicine. However, resources are still required to take a more integrated approach. References by the panel members about, again, the siloed and constrained operating environment that we hope will, in its next iteration, be more effective in advancing Indigenous-led conservation, not only for Indigenous people and the land that they come from, but for all Canadians and for that matter, for everybody in this world, because the biodiversity loss and climate change affects all of us, as was also mentioned by the panelists. This land and water and resources supports our human well-being, our mental and our emotional health, and it's more noted now than ever before because we're in the midst of this global pandemic. On the IPCA panel presentation, currently there's 28 IPCAs funded in Canada and 160 expressions of interest. And if Canada is going to achieve its goal of 1 million square kilometers conserved by 2020, then we're certainly going to have to play a lead role in that process. The IPCAs and guardians managing them is a gift to Canadians in the world as a mitigation strategy for climate change and biodiversity loss. And that's so ironic to me, because as Native people, we have been the most marginalized and the most impacted because of the history of colonization coveting the resources off of our lands. And so that model that has proven to be unsustainable, we hope that, and we have heard from the minister that they heed our warning and they say that they can only move forward with our partnership. But that partnership has to be meaningful. It has to be something where we have decision-making authority over our future to be self-determining people for our homelands and the resources that we depend on for sustenance. And how to achieve that is through these, I was referenced in the IPCA panel presentation. The IPCAs can play a foundational role in creating guardian programs that create a safe space for our children. That promises, that's the promise of the IPCA as refugia for climate change and a place for to preserve biodiversity. The roles of the guardian can be determined by climate change. It must be determined by climate change, combining local and traditional knowledge in Western science. More opportunities than threats with IPCAs. There's a comment that was made and that needs to be taken to heart into the minds of people who might become territorial over their jobs. You know, this concern about feathering the responsibility of the minister if we're going to truly achieve reconciliation. That means shared decision-making and revenue and benefit sharing off the lands that we come from and that we share. We need to make this huge societal shift around resource management, as I've said, and I think we're well on our way. We're doing the important work, and I want to thank you all for taking time, because there's always demands to be somewhere else and do something else. But for those of you that are participating, I encourage you to share the word about this important work. It's the work that only we can do as the First Peoples, to assume our responsibility in a good way, in a way that will do honor and justice to our future generations and to the memory of those children that we have lost. And we fight for the children that are unborn. Wallace Gayasika, have a good day and a good evening. Thank you.
Masi Cho, Frank, and Masi to everyone for having joined us today. We so appreciate you joining us. And before you leave the chat, we encourage you to come tomorrow for our final day of gathering. And if you'd be willing, throw in the chat how you say thank you in your language. We'd love to see that. So Masi, and we'll see you all tomorrow.